Good afternoon. This is the April 2nd, 2018 regular meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission. We have roll call.
President Lau.
Present.
Commissioner Avanesian.
Here.
Commissioner Hale.
Here.
Commissioner Camargo.
Here.
Commissioner Kadikian.
First item.
2-1, Final Environmental Impact Report, Grayson Repowering Project. First, it will be staff presentation.
Ready?
Ready.
Here we go. You got it. Madam President, members of the commission, we have a presentation for you to go over the kind of high-level points of the final EIR, and then, of course, we would have expected a lot of time to answer your questions, and then you take questions from the public and ask us more questions, possibly. So, leading up to and ultimately an opportunity for you to make a recommendation to City Council, if you so desire, and Doreen can help work through that. So, for the proposed repower and kind of the basis for where we are, just very basic points here. The existing plant is not environmentally sustainable. There's no question about that. The emissions out of that plant now are poor quality. We have a health risk assessment concern, great concern, to be honest with you. As it says here, we have the plant is not able to integrate intermittent renewables. Emissions are higher than current technology by a long shot. Old units are subject to upcoming SCAQMD rules. So we've got a couple of things on the horizon, and Mr. Laney and his discussions will go into a little bit more detail. One is the health risk assessment, of which we've just been put on notice that we have until June to submit that health risk assessment to the AQMD. We know full well what it is because we've already conducted it, and then we will await their decision, which we know pretty much what that's going to be. The other is there are especially NOx requirements that are changing at AQMD. They've notified us. Those will probably be out somewhere towards the end of this year, the first part of 2019. And we know that will greatly impact the ability of the current plant to actually run, quite honestly. The current plant is not efficient. It certainly isn't efficient as current technology on the market. And most units in our fleet are 77 years old, all the way up to, some of the newer equipment is 60. We have Unit 9, of course, the 2004 unit, but we're proposing to keep that unit under our scenarios. The existing plant is not reliable. We've had 40 unplanned outages since May of 2015. Not one piece of there's never been a time in the last 5 years that all the equipment has been operational at one time. And currently, we have 2 units that are operational. Spare parts are scarce, unavailable from vendors. It's just a whole maintenance issue. It's become more and more difficult to find folks to work on the equipment. It's been more and more difficult to keep that equipment going. As you would imagine, with equipment that is well beyond its lifespan, as determined by the manufacturer and anybody else who's in the business. We've gotten a lot of good years out of it. There's no question about that. But going forward, we're running on borrowed time. The existing plant is not cost effective. There's just no question about that. This generation is some of the highest in our portfolio. It's significantly higher than current technology. We have to buy a lot of ancillary services in the spot market in order to make up for the deficiencies we have at the plant, including spinning and non-spinning reserve, and we pay a premium for those particular services. This plant in the last 10 years has had a maintenance, just maintenance, cost of about $57 a megawatt hour produced. And that's all units with the exception of 9. Unit 9's been right around $27. The equipment that's proposed for the repower is closer between $7 and $9. So that gives you an estimate. $7 and $9, $57. And that's just the maintenance component. So there's no question about that the units are becoming more and more costly to operate, more and more costly to keep running. We have limited transmission capabilities. That we've gone over many, many times. We currently have 200 megawatts that come in at 2 different locations. The chances of increasing that are extremely limited. I always refrain from saying impossible, but they're extremely limited. And even working with our balancing authority, the City of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, it does not look like there's anything in the foreseeable future. We sit in an island here in Glendale, and building transmission is very, very difficult and very, very environmentally, it has a great impact on the environment and it is very, very costly. All of those things play into the fact that our ability to go out and get more transmission is extremely limited, if not close to impossible. So with that, we'll move right into the, I think the next slide, Catalina, to the EIR process itself. Mike Weber is the principal scientist from Stantec who did a bulk of this. He had a whole team working with him. I'm sure Mike would be happy to give credit to that team, but I'll let Mike go through and talk to you a little bit about the process.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, commissioners, other city representatives, members of the public as well. Wanted to give a very brief overview of the CEQA process and EIR process that we have taken to date on this project. Next slide, please. The California Environmental Quality Act is a statute that requires state and local agencies to identify the significant environmental impacts of their actions and to avoid or mitigate those potential environmental impacts to the degree feasible. In this case, the City of Glendale is the lead agency for the proposed Grayson Repowering Project, and the city and Stantec on your behalf prepared a final environmental impact report that provides a very thorough analysis of the potential environmental impacts of the proposed project that analyzed all the potential environmental factors that were required to analyze under CEQA that were not screened out in the initial study that was prepared prior to the environmental impact report. So we looked at things like air quality, aesthetics, greenhouse gases, noise, transportation and traffic, water quality, hazards and hazardous materials. That EIR also evaluates a range of alternatives, and it also addresses and responds to all public comments received during the public review period of the EIR. And as analyzed in that final EIR, the project does not result in any significant and unavoidable environmental impacts. Next slide, please. The alternatives that were evaluated in the EIR included 5. That was the no project alternative, essentially doing nothing and running the plant to failure, an energy storage project alternative, an alternative energy project alternative, and then 2 smaller generation sizes of the project, 150 megawatt project alternative with new transmission lines, and also a 200 megawatt project alternative with either battery energy storage or transmission. And the alternative specifically evaluated in the final EIR was selected for 200 megawatts with the battery energy storage, not the transmission. And there were also a range of other alternatives that were considered but not evaluated in the EIR, but they are discussed in there, and the reasons that they are not carried forward into a full alternatives evaluation are discussed in there. That includes things like power plant sites, generation technology alternatives, alternative fuel technologies, power plant cooling alternatives, even rooftop solar distributed throughout the city. And the conclusion on all of those alternatives was they were either not feasible, would result in actually a higher magnitude of environmental impacts, or did not meet the project objectives. Preparation of final EIR responded to all those public comments that we just talked about. So to summarize, we had over 1,100 public comments received. Those are actually letters, not just individual comments. A lot of those letters had multiple comments or questions in them, plus 131 verbal comments received during previous commission meetings, and then also commission comments as well. So those are all responded to in the EIR, and the final EIR that was released on March 2nd, 2018. So that has been available now exactly 1 month today. We are anticipating taking the final EIR in front of City Council for consideration of certification on April 10th this month, just a little over a week away. In those comments that we received, a lot of them focused on these 3 key themes: the project size and need, air quality, and renewable energy. We responded to those specific comments in topical responses. Specifically, those are in topical responses 3, 8, and 5 in the response to comments package, which is included in the final EIR. And that concludes the EIR overview, so thank you very much.
Commission, next we're going to ask Dave Tadiosian to come up. Dave was our chief engineer on this project, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the energy sources and how that plays into the proposal.
Good afternoon, Madam President, Commissioners, and members of the public. As Steve said, I'm Dave Tadiosian, a member of the project team. Next slide, please. Whoops. There we go. Okay, sorry. All right, this diagram is basically describes where Glendale gets its energy from. So there are, it's not showing up. In the upper right there, you have the sources of energy that flow from the northwest through the Pacific DC intertie from Southern Oregon down to Sylmar Station to the east, which is in the LADWP system. And that's composed of renewable wind energy resources that are affirmed by fossil energy, run of the river hydro, and non-renewable energy purchases. And in total, that can be up to 100 megawatts. That Pacific DC intertie connection is important because it's the single largest contingency that the city has to deal with. It is literally 2 wires that run, because it's a DC circuit, it's literally 2 wires that run from Southern California all the way up to the Southern Oregon. And if you have a break in one of those wires or at the AC to DC converter stations at either end, you lose the entire capacity. Other times of the year, it can be derated during hot weather, but that one transmission line defines the single largest contingency that the city needs to be prepared to deal with. That line at times has been out of service for months. It routinely goes out of service every year for maintenance outage, so it's something that the system has to be able to cope with. To the lower right, you have the southwest area transmission imports, and there's multiple transmission lines that bring that power to LADWP, and so a failure of one of those transmission lines doesn't take out all the supply like you do with the Pacific Northwest. So again, you have non-renewable purchases, renewable energy that's firmed with fossil sources. The Intermountain Power and Hoover comes through there. Palo Verde comes through there. So that's another 100 megawatts. That's the 200 megawatts of imports that Glendale has available to it. Those imports come into the LADWP system, and then through LADWP are delivered to GWP. Within GWP, you've got about 39 megawatts from Burbank that comes in. There's the Grayson Power Plant. Since about 2002, there's been, 15 megawatts of renewable solar rooftop energy that's been developed within the city. And so you see that there, and that serves both Glendale residents and commercial businesses like the Galleria. So that is where the energy comes from. And then if we go to the next slide. So the system has experienced a peak load of 350 megawatts. And if we look at the available resources, there's Grayson Unit 9, which, as Steve said, would be retained under the proposed repowering. There's Magnolia, which is about 39 megawatts. There's 100 megawatts from the northwest, 100 megawatts from the southwest. And so that leaves a shortfall of 63 megawatts in order to meet the peak load if everything is running. Then we need to be prepared to deal with losses, contingency losses. And so the loss, single largest contingency is 100 megawatts on the DC intertie. The next largest contingency is 71 megawatts, and that would be from one of the proposed units. If it wasn't that unit, then it'd be 48 megawatts from Unit 9 or one of the transmission lines for the Southwest. But planning for these two failures, that's the planning criteria that LADWP uses. It's what other utilities use. And it's what's done to provide the defense in depth and the reliability so that when people go to turn on their light switch, the lights come on. So if you add those up, the 63 megawatts that's needed to meet peak load, the 171 megawatts that's needed to provide reserves, you end up with a need of 234 megawatts. Aside from whatever resources you might want to use to supply that 234 megawatts, that's what the system needs in order to ensure reliability. And thank you.
Carl Laney, Commission members, is our air quality expert. He's going to give you a little overview of the proposed project, the benefits, and a little bit more detail on what I touched on regarding health risk assessment and future AQMD rulemaking.
Good evening. In preparation of the final environmental impact report, we responded to a lot of public comments, as Mr. Zern indicated, and that also required us to take a look at additional analysis in some cases. And coincidentally, at the same time, we were faced with several policy and regulatory changes at the South Coast Air Quality Management District. So what I want to do tonight is just touch upon a couple of those things real quickly. First and foremost, if you take a look at the final EIR in what we call our topical response to air quality, you'll see a lengthy discussion about how our environmental impact analysis for the sake of CEQA is basically an artifact of the South Coast permitting process. And that means several things as you take a look at the numbers that have been presented to you. The first of which is the South Coast permitting process really forces us to increase our operating schedule for permitting purposes, and that's because they don't let us share devices that are similar to meet a specific need. If I need 500 starts or if I need 100 starts, I can't say, give me 100 starts and I'll share it between two turbines. It doesn't work that way. So that had an impact on the numbers that you have seen. Also, most importantly, the way we chose to use the South Coast emissions calculations also had an impact on the numbers that you see when we take a look at daily or annual emission increases. If you take a look at the final EIR, you'll see that when you truly compare historic actual emissions to permitted potential emissions, you won't necessarily see the increases that are implied in the draft EIR. The reason for that is we didn't take a look only at historic actual emissions. We discounted those to the same levels that the district uses for its new source review offsetting purposes. That's intended not to show what actual emissions were, but intended instead to make sure that when we apply offsets, we're truly offsetting well above the actual emission increase of the new project. So I do encourage everyone to take a look at that. But then the question becomes, well, is it reasonable to expect, and if I see the next slide, is it reasonable to expect that we wouldn't see dramatic emission increases? And I think it is. If we take a look at some of the operating profiles of the project, compared with where we are today, you see several things. If we take a look at plant efficiency or heat input values, we'll see that the proposed project is 50% more efficient, more fuel efficient than the existing equipment. That has a bearing on things like greenhouse gas emissions, particulate emissions, and sulfur emissions that are based upon fuel characteristics and combustion characteristics rather than emission control systems. But then when we start to take a look at the emissions that are controlled, not only by the newer combustion technology of our new turbines, but also by the add-on emission control systems, you start to see things that become even a little bit more dramatic. An 81% reduction in NOx emissions when we take a look at on a pound per megawatt hour. Similar reductions for carbon monoxide and VOC. I'm going to talk about NOx a little bit more in a second because of the rule development. But what you'll also see in there too is the results of additional analysis we did. In the comments that we received, there were a lot of concerns about public health from the proposed project. not only at the facility itself or nearby the facility, nearby commercial or residential receptors, but also at school receptors. The final EIR has a little bit of a discussion about that. And I want to remind the Commission that not only are the peak emissions and emission concentrations and health risk impacts that we show you in the EIR acceptable from a CEQA perspective and a South Coast perspective, they are a fraction of the significance thresholds. But certainly as you get farther out from the facility itself into surrounding neighborhoods, into school locations, you'll see an even further dramatic decline in those risks. But the other thing that came from those comments was us having to take a look at the existing health risk of the facility. We conducted an a health risk assessment for the existing operations of the facility based upon 2015 reported emissions. The comparison that you see on the slide there is based upon our future potential permitted operations versus historic actual operations. You'll see that for cancer risk, what we assessed was a cancer risk greater than 25 in 1 million case, 25 in 1 million. Although the project that we're proposing has a risk of 0.91 in a million. You'll see similar dramatic reductions from the proposed project in acute short-term health impacts as well as chronic non-cancer impacts. We'll be talking a little bit about that in a second. I want to go back to the NOx emissions. Mr. Zern indicated that South Coast is looking at new rules. South Coast has been obligated by the state of California to amend Rule 1135, which is its NOx rule for power production facilities. South Coast has no choice but to do this. The rule language that we are looking at, the technology standards that we are looking at, would require power producing facilities with existing equipment to meet current new technology standards. The same NOx emissions, the same technology standards that are being proposed to you tonight. It would go into effect in the early 2020s. We expect rules to be adopted by the governing board in late 2018. We would have to follow immediately with permitting, and we would have to come to terms with a compliance strategy. The rule would make or limit operation of all of the emission systems at the facility today. Most importantly, it would make a retrofit that is infeasible to the boilers. It would also require retrofits to turbines 8, A, B, and C. They also would not comply with the rule, and increased operation of turbine 9 would also not comply with the proposed rule language. Now, even if we do come to terms with NOx and we find a way to control NOx to the regulated standards that we see coming down the road, that does not do much for the health risks that we see from the existing facility. Mr. Zern indicated that South Coast has asked us, I should say directed us, GWP, to prepare a health risk assessment on the existing facility. This is in response to the AB 2588 Toxics Hotspots Act and South Coast Rule 1402. South Coast directed GWP to conduct a toxics inventory based upon 2015 operations. GWP submitted that to the district. The district looked at those emissions and concluded that the potential health risks of the facility are significant enough to warrant a detailed risk assessment and has asked for that assessment. The assessment we did, we believe, will serve as the foundation for that. But what's important to understand is if, in fact, that assessment does show health risks greater than, or cancer risks greater than 25 in a million, GWP will be mandated to develop and implement a risk reduction program. Again, the project being presented to you would serve as that risk reduction program. So, in summary, though, I wanted to give also an update on the status of the South Coast permitting process. South Coast did review the draft EIR. They determined that the analysis is appropriate, and they chose not to comment on it. More recently, South Coast has conducted its own assessment of the project because we submitted permit applications to the district. They have since concluded, based upon their own assessment, that all of our analyses are indeed accurate and appropriate. Our technology assessment, our emission inventories, our emission offset strategies, most importantly, our local and regional ambient air quality impact analysis, and our health risk assessment. Based upon their concurrence with all of those analyses, South Coast is proceeding to draft rule language, or excuse me, permit language, and we do expect to see that language shortly. Thank you.
Mr. President, of course, if you need questions of the speakers, we'll bring them back up. It's at your pleasure. And I'm holding the document that Carl was just referring to that we received from AQMD, which clearly shows, based on their modeling, that we are under every single threshold of every single unit under every single scenario. So getting something like that from the AQMD is not something that happens every day. I think it's a clear indication that they're, as Carl said, prepared to issue the permit. And in their mind, this is an improvement to basin air quality. I don't think there's any question about that. Also, something that occurred, and this is something that Carl didn't have in his analysis that we just received from the California Environmental Protection Agency. It's the tracking and evaluation of benefits and impacts of greenhouse gas limits. And it has in here, it's a rather lengthy document. I'd be happy to give you copies of these. It's a state document. In here, they list the 25 facilities with the highest toxicity-weighted air emissions. And there is a list of cement manufacturers and oil refineries, with one exception. There's Grayson Power Plant, the only power plant on the list. There's a naval facility on here, but the rest of these are refining operations, compressor operations, borax plants, refineries, cement plants. For those of you familiar with the cement making business, it's extremely nasty when it comes to air environment. And so we have the, I would say something quite the opposite of the distinction of being on that list of one of the most toxic facilities in the state. Analysis and necessity, and this is just a roundup of some of the things that we've talked about. Go ahead. We've talked before about the estimated cost of Grayson repowering, and there's a lot of folks who have decided to, I guess, take this budget and make it, whatever fits their particular argument. The $500 million is essentially a construction budget. It includes the development, the design, and the environmental review. It includes the acquisition of the power generating equipment. It includes the demolition, the engineering, procurement, and construction, essentially the construction contract, AQMD permitting. It also includes a contingency and fees for us to do some improvements we need to make for Unit 9, which is staying, to integrate that into the system. And there are some minor fees that we have to pay for legal, financial analysis, and bonding fees that go into that. I can give you estimates on each one of those. Obviously, the Power Island equipment, generating equipment, is very expensive. It's about $155 million. And each one of these has gone through a process with the City Council as far as vetting. So it's been an RFQ, RFP, straight bid and or a design bid build kind of a thing for each of these. The construction is about $225 million. The permitting is about $20 million. The demolition is about $20 million. Again, you see as those things go in there and they add up. That's not an operational budget, that's a construction budget. That's the outside number. We hope to make that, hope to get that number lower through the competitive process, but that was our estimate. We're not trying to change that or create some subterfuges as other parties may, and we're sticking with that particular estimate. Obviously, that's the proposal for the 250 megawatt plant. As I said, the project will be funded through debt financing bonds, where you are able to take advantage of current, still very favorable market and extend the payment over time. And based on improved plant efficiency, reduced cost of reserves, there's no projected cost impact to our customers. Our rate schedule will be coming out probably within the next couple of weeks as we release that to the public and begin our discussions. You'll clearly see in there that it's an extremely modest plan. It has no Grayson in it. That rate schedule will be the rate schedule we propose, whether there's a Grayson repower or no Grayson repower. It isn't there. And that's how expensive it is. Go back to some of the figures I was giving you on just the maintenance part of it. And the debt service can be handled through simply the savings that we face. So not only are you going back to what Carl Laney was talking about, improving the emissions, you're also providing a reliable source of power without impacting the ratepayers. And the plant was not designed to sell power. I don't know how many times I have to say that, but apparently I have to say it a lot. Because people will continue to come back and make up a news story about it. But it is not based on any sale of power. Now, can you sell power? Certainly the city council could direct me to sell power if they so desired. That's their call. We haven't brought it to them, we haven't suggested it, but they could do that. However, this plant was not based on oversizing it, as the accusations have been made, to sell power to somehow finance it. I don't need to do that. The plant saves so much money on its own, it finances itself that way. There it is. Financial feasibility does not rely upon third-party power sales agreements. That's what that bullet there means. Next, please. Delaying for us is not an option. This has been a 4-year process, and it was probably 15 years overdue to begin with. Any additional study results in, just for information purposes, up to a 3-year delay. That gets us back to where we are today. So, in other words, it'd be 3-year delay to get back to here, and then an additional 3 years to finish construction of whatever that option would be at that time. GWP will not have sufficient resources to meet load. LADWP is not Glendale. They are not obligated to sell us power. They are, by their charter, not able to become our power provider. We have talked to them at length. Any question about that, I don't care what the person says, that they worked for the LADWP or not. We have constant contact with LADWP, with people who make these decisions, people who are in the generation, the transmission, that are in the balancing authority management, who are in charge of making sure that LADWP has power every day and that the balancing authority is taken care of. And there is no long-term agreement possible. They're willing to help us through the transition, but I can guarantee you that if the city of Glendale does not transition this plant, LADWP will not be offering us any power. In fact, because of the way the market is today and a bit of uncertainty in certain areas, LADWP has actually put us on notice that they doubt that they can even provide us emergency power in Q3, third quarter being the hottest part of the year. They have in the past done that, even though it goes against their internal policy. They have done that for us when that wasn't done on purpose. They have done that for us, but they have put us on notice they will no longer be able to do that. I can tell you last year there was about 5 occasions without that power we would have had rolling blackouts. No question. That was the only option we had. There was no other option. So we are unable to generate sufficient capacity due to the present condition of our equipment, unable to meet reserve obligations, potentially resulting in blackouts. John Stickman, our FERC attorney, is here because there's been some interpretations of what we're required to do either from the federal government, FERC, WEC, NERC, or under our balancing authority agreement. They are false. So I'll have Mr. Stickman come up. Mr. Stickman is our chief negotiator for all agreements with the city of Los Angeles. He can tell you exactly what our obligations are and where breach will come. And breach will come pretty quick if we don't have those reliability contingencies in place. And again, let me the term reliability to me is of the utmost importance. It's not a word we throw around. Folks who have come up with so-called options to this, reliability obviously is not something they're thinking about. I'm thinking about making sure that we have no outages, that we have no rolling blackouts, we have no dark periods of time. I'm not willing to gamble on unproven technology or some combination of a bunch of factors coming together in order to make sure that we provide power. Reliability means having sufficient resources in place, renewable and non-renewable, that can get us the power we need when we need it under any circumstance. Bad weather, loss of transmission, loss of outside assistance, heat. That's our biggest primary issue that we have to deal with. That's what we talk about with reliability. That's why when you have the contingencies, sure, the contingencies show you building more than you would use on a regular basis, but it also has built in there when something happens. You heard Mr. Tadiosian indicate that the Pacific Intertide line, our chief line, goes down every year for maintenance. It's gone down every year for maintenance that I've been the general manager. It's also gone down every year for other reasons. And when that line goes down, it doesn't go down for a short time. So we've immediately got to be able to make that up. And to say that we can make it up by telling everybody, you can conserve today and it'll happen, just isn't feasible. Is there a way to get to a healthy integrated plan that puts all of these different aspects together and make it viable? Absolutely. But it isn't one or the other. We aren't proposing an all gas-fired utility, just as we wouldn't say an all non-gas-fired utility, whatever those resources would be, is viable either. Somewhere in the middle, you have a nice integrated plan, which is where we're trying to get. But we do need some stability in having that local generation, that dependable generation. AQMD will be making decisions, as Mr. Laney indicated, some sooner than later. We'll definitely get the health risk assessment fairly soon. What that means is we'll have to make an instant public-wide notice to everybody that we are in violation, and we'll have to have a mitigation plan. And the mitigation plan is going to be to start reducing some of our units. And then we'll look if there's any feasible way to meet the requirements by doing some level of work. But again, you're talking about equipment that is mechanically long in the tooth. Putting millions of dollars in it for a short period of time doesn't seem like the most economically viable option either. And then we'll have the NOx standards, which will come in, as Mr. Laney indicated. That will be another big hit, and we don't believe that our units will be able to withstand that level. And that's typical of AQMD. They'll continue to set rules based on new technology, and that's where they want you to get, that's the attainment level they're looking for. It makes sense. It's what they want to do to clean up the basin environment. AQMD is a regional regulatory agency looking to clean up the basin, the overall area. And so they'll be issuing those, and we'll have to react one way or the other. Either we'll have to stop running the units, or we have to look at, is it viable to even retrofit them to try to continue for some period of time? It's already talking about almost 80-year-old units in some cases. Again, the health risk assessment will have to be mitigated, and immediately. I think we have an obligation to the public beyond whatever AQMD may say to us of time limit. I think we need to act immediately once we've been notified that that's an issue. And that would be my recommendation to council, that we act immediately to begin to mitigate that. Everything from eliminating landfill gas as a fuel at the site and sending it back to Shoal to burn in the flares, all the way to shutting units down and trying to figure out what our options from there are. But I think we have an obligation to do as much as we can, as quick as we can, again, while balancing what we're going to do for the future electrical provision. It puts us in a very difficult situation. We've waited this long, and this is the ramifications of waiting this long. Again, I said 15 years, maybe 20 years ago, we should have started doing something. Doesn't have to be wholesale replacement, but it would have been selective replacement, and I think we would have been in a much better situation today. Unfortunately, we didn't do that. You've heard me talk to you about that before. I wish we could go back, but we can't, so we have to look forward and try to do the best we can. So again, you've seen this and heard this through some of the things that we've said. The Grayson Repowering gives us sufficient resources to meet load and reserve obligations. We can integrate the intermittency of some of the renewables that are out there today and not have to pay somebody else to do it, both local and imported. Aid in meeting, that would help us meet the RPS and the cap and trade requirements. Most importantly, the new units are, in essence, the mitigation measure for cleaning up the emissions. And by doing that, we greatly increase or improve the emissions, as Mr. Laney clearly pointed out, and of course the health risk assessment as well. So I think that's all we have. Is that it, Ms. Lee? That's it. So we'd be happy
Okay.
to answer any questions you have of the team or staff.
Well, I guess my first question is, when we sat here in October and reviewed the draft, the recommendation at that point was for an all-gas plant. So I would ask GWP, are you still proposing an all-gas plant, or what is the current proposal for the number and size of the turbines, if their turbines are proposed, and what other changes may have been made between now and that October meeting?
So Commissioner Law and Catalina, I don't know if you have the slide for the 200 megawatt option. So in the EIR, the final EIR, the project listed or the project reviewed is the 250 megawatt project. It includes 4 generating units, 2 simple cycle, 2 combined cycle. And that makes up to 261, 262 megawatts that we talk about. Since that time, and I mentioned, I believe to you at that last meeting, that what was under the 200 megawatt scenario, it involved the integration of batteries. And at the time we did this, we did not believe that that was economically or operationally viable based on the way the market was. We were looking at 2-hour batteries. We were looking at operationally very few, if any, utilities were convinced that that was viable, and we weren't using them. And the cost was really high, very high. Since that time, the prices have come down. Edison, Imperial Irrigation District, San Diego Gas and Electric, ourselves, we actually put a small battery project in place and started testing it. All of these utilities have put some level, small level of batteries and storage into place and began to use them in their operations. It gave us a little bit better comfort level that was an option, but clearly the economics are what appealed more. You know, coming down from $1 million a megawatt to 400,000 or possibly less makes it a lot different situation that you're looking at. So when we reevaluated the 200 megawatt option, it actually comes out to a 191 megawatt option. And I think in the EIR we have this as alternative 5. I'll look at Lisa and see. Alternative 5. It's actually 191 megawatts. It's 3 generating units, not 4. It's 2 simple cycle, 1 combined cycle. And then it's the integration of the 50 megawatts of battery. That's 50 megawatts of 4-hour batteries. So you get 50 megawatts slash 250 megawatt or 200 megawatt hour.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time, please?
50 megawatts of batteries, but you slash that, they're 4-hour batteries, so you get a 200 megawatt hour.
Okay, so it's
project.
50 megawatts. And are there any other cities in right now in Southern California or in LA County that have battery projects of that size?
Not that size. Imperial Irrigation District has 40 megawatts. They're about twice as big as we are, utility. That's out in the Brawley, El Centro area. They, under a consent decree, because they had a tremendous accident that was their fault. And so they actually, the transmission line took out the entire southwest United States, and so they got penalized pretty heavily. One of the conditions was they put in a battery storage facility. They put in 40 megawatts. That's pretty big. Edison has put in 2 40 megawatt battery facilities to date at 2 different locations. They did those, and San Diego Gas and Electric has, I believe, a 40 megawatt as well going in at Carlsbad. And those are primarily, the Edison ones were done as a way to alleviate some of the loss of other generation that they were just retiring in general. Some of it had to do with peaking issues with gas availability was in question, so some of the potential curtailments of gas that they were anticipating could happen. So when you look at now, you know, there's been some comparison. I noticed in some presentation, they mentioned a couple of projects that they compared Glendale to. It looked like a comparison. One was a PG&E project, one was a Southern California Edison project. These are 2 of the 5 largest utilities in the United States. It's a little hard to take utility our size and make them apples to apples comparison. But when you look at the number of megawatts of battery storage we're proposing to what Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Pacific Gas and Electric, and by the way, I was just recently at a conference where I spoke to all their folks and they laid out all of their plans for the near term. You looked at it, I don't know, compare it on a megawatt generated versus, or a number of customers. With our 50 megawatts, we'll probably be out there about as far as any utility that's operating today.
Okay. And so the presentation from Mr. Laney regarding emissions and air quality, is that the 200 megawatt
That's the
project?
250.
That's the original project that we
Correct.
discussed in the draft. So
Correct.
that is the gas-fired plant without
Correct.
any battery storage.
No battery storage.
Right,
That's
so this is
250,
not
no battery.
actually the project that GWP is currently contemplating,
It's the project we're contemplating. It's not the alternative.
but it's not the alternative that currently, as I understand it, is the preferred alternative.
No, it's the alternative is available, and what I said is it has matured into a position where I think it is very viable if it is the council's decision to move in that direction.
It is a viable alternative.
Right. So we
These
have a preferred
numbers-
alternative, which is 250. We've
Okay.
got alternative number one, and that's the alternative, was the
200
191 with batteries.
191 plus battery.
And my comment to the council was, I feel comfortable we can make that work from a reliability standpoint, from an operational standpoint, certainly from an economic standpoint, and I believe that we can meet all of our reserve requirements as well. That's
Okay.
what I said.
So I'm just trying to understand from my own, just to make sure
Yeah,
I've
sure.
got it.
Absolutely.
The numbers that I see here on this chart represent a gas-only project.
It-
And right now, the discussion that we're having is really focused on that viable alternative, which presumably would have lower emissions even than what is laid out on this chart, because the 71 megawatt turbine, which is a combined cycle unit, is not in that viable alternative.
Correct. So I guess the answer is, if you choose to discuss that alternative, we're more than happy to continue to discuss that alternative with you, but you're absolutely right. Those numbers that Mr. Laney showed that are in your presentation are for the 250 4-unit, two simple
okay.
cycle,
All
two
right.
combined cycle.
Thank you.
Less than that, the emissions go down. And under an AQMD permitting process, and Mr. Laney can correct me if I'm wrong, that is all, as long as you're moving down, you're good. It's when you go up that you would have an issue, and that's pretty obvious.
So there are no circumstances under which a battery storage project, that viable option is going to have, that viable alternative, is going to have increased impacts over the gas-only option.
That's correct. And I don't know if Mr. Laney has any specific numbers for the option, but it certainly will be less emissions by the simple fact that you reduced one of the operating units.
Okay. My fellow commissioners, questions? Commissioner Kadikia?
All right, the discussion with regards to the delay, there was indication about a 3-year delay. I'm assuming that if we reject the certification, is that what we're talking about, the 3-year delay?
If the city council, Mr. Kadikian, were to not certify and approve the project, for instance, and they were to say, just keep looking at it or keep studying it, assuming you need a a fair amount of time to study, and then come back and try to, and go back and redo all of what you've done to date. And some of it is still going to be valid, so it's not a matter of redoing every single thing. But just in a conservative way, we said that would, to get us back to the point we are today, ready to make a decision on the EIR, would be approximately 3 years.
So when we talk about recirculating the EIR and maybe a small portion of it, are we talking about a 3-year delay?
Well, first of all, you have to go through the process of defining if there is any changes you want to make to the EIR.
Right.
So you've got that in place, and that's going to take some time. There's just no question about it. Then, depending on, and again, I'll let Lisa, I'm probably going too far. There would be depending on what level of change you made to the EIR, you would have to recirculate it, get comments, and then respond to those comments. And as you can see, that took us, boy, Mike, about a year. So since the initial impact went out, the environmental process has had some level of work going on for 3 years. Again, some of the work may be viable to carry over, and you don't have to redo every single thing. But depending on what additional items you include, you may have to go through the whole recertification.
That's just assuming that there's anything that arises to the level that would require recirculation of the document. You'd have to have increased impacts and significant new information to require that in the first place. So we would have to know the scope of what the changes were that you were discussing.
The other thing that plays into that is we have certain agreements in place that would expire, and then we'd have to go back out. Depending on what we were going to ask for, we would have to redo those. What I call the vetting process, whether it's an RFP, RFQ, or a specification and bid process, we'd have to go back and do those over again. That also puts a delay in the process. Some of those have taken us close to a year to accomplish.
I had some questions about the final EIR, which was not discussed on this presentation.
Would you like to have our scientist start?
Well,
Is
no.
it emissions related, or is it general?
It's general with regards to shaping and firming.
Okay.
But I don't want to.
Well, why don't we have Mike come up, and maybe Dave can back him up, and if it's specific legal stuff, Lisa can. So we'll just why don't you just ask some questions, and we'll see if we can.
When I was reading the final EIR, particularly with regards to the topical questions, a lot of the answers or responses were, with regards to renewables, is even if you have renewable, you need shaping and firming.
Correct.
But there wasn't a discussion of if you have this much renewable, you need this much shaping and firming. And my question in general is, the whole state is talking 100% renewable in 2040 or 45. Where's that shaping and firming going to come from if renewable needs shaping and firming all the time?
Dave, do you want to, or Mark?
So for the state going to 100% renewables, that's why you also see the state incentivizing storage now, because they want to use storage in part to handle that. You know, what happens with renewables is capacity drops off, and it can drop off suddenly, because you can have wind go away in 10 minutes, you can have a cloud transient. So the way that's dealt with today is, because there aren't large amounts of storage out there, is you have spinning reserve that can ramp up to cover that drop in capacity. So when we talk about needing the units for firming and shaping, it's to be able to deal with the intermittency of renewables that the city's contracting for. Some of those contracts, as I talked about, like from where you have contracts with renewables with fossil firming, so some of the stuff you're getting is comes firmed, and Mark can talk more about the details of the contracts. But that firming and shaping, how much you need, is tied to how much renewables you're getting in. As renewables increase, you know, the city needs to comply with the RPS standard. And, you know, it's close to meeting the 50% requirement already. But that's what drives how much firming and shaping is needed.
And
Mark, you want to add anything?
it isn't clear that storage alone will be able to handle that. And as Dave said, if we bought like we do now, if we have the opportunity to buy solar from Arizona or from Nevada, you have it firmed and shaped in Arizona and Nevada. It's still gas that's shaping it. It's just not gas in California. It still needs to be firmed and shaped, and we pay a very high price for that. And so what we had said is, you know, our ability to use the new plant to do that would save us quite a bit of money. And then as storage becomes more defined and refined and available, but the chances are, you know, you're going to need firming and shaping if it takes place outside of California. I don't know, just that seems to be counter intuitive, but okay, you know, that's what'll happen. And that's where the deals that we look at they either, now, grid scale solar, as Dave has said, the development of those projects will almost always include battery from now on, because you lose a certain percentage of efficiency. A lot of times those projects are only good for about a third of what their faceplate is. So you bring the batteries in to get a clear, if it's 250 megawatts, a solid 250 megawatts. But it's still an intermittent power source that's going to have to be dealt with.
Part of also what Grayson's ability to firm and shape renewables offers the city is, you've got the 200 megawatts of transmission capacity. So when you firm and shape that power away, part of that 200 megawatts now has to be fossil power, because that's what's doing the firming and shaping. When you do the firming and shaping here, now you're able to dedicate that transmission capacity all to renewables. So that's part of how Grayson contributes to helping the city increase the amount of renewable energy it uses.
And I'm going to ask Mark Young. He's our integrated resource planning administrator. So Mark is the one responsible for power trading, power supply, contractual, negotiating contracts, managing contracts. And so he is the one to go to when it comes to issues of purchasing power wherever we purchase that from.
Fellow commissioners, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the firming and shaping. If we have local solar on rooftops and the cloud comes over in Glendale, there's not going to be output of those units or those solar panels. Local generation is going to have to pick that up, and it has to pick it up at a very fast rate. Thermal generation's not so good at doing that. So we have to have enough local generation here to be able to cover that. If we didn't have the firming and shaping on remote resources, those remote resources would take up transmission that we wouldn't be able to use to supply power to the city. So the firming and shaping is a very important component to import the solar, which is that's what everybody's doing right now. Wind is going to be the next thing on the horizon, excuse me, with the Wyoming wind. And we actually talk about that as regulation up and regulation down as opposed to ancillary services.
I mean, I understand the need for firming and shaping. I'm not questioning that. I'm just questioning how much. And when I was reading the final EIR, whenever there was a discussion of renewable, there was always, well, we need this power for firming and shaping, without saying, well, at least we could use this much of power for firming and shaping and everything else for reserve. But to continue more, now that I hear we have a possible alternative of 191 megawatt with battery storage of 50 megawatt, is that meeting our firming and shaping needs as well?
Each contract that we can potentially get into to meet our renewable standards, they have a portfolio, and that tells you what the degree of the firming and shaping component you can expect when you get involved in that project. But I think with the 50 megawatts and 200 megawatt hour battery, it would definitely give us a leg up. I believe that we still need to have local generation on, but it wouldn't have to be at the degree of having, say, one 100 megawatt unit on at half load.
Ideally, from a purely environmental standpoint, you would want to have your batteries being recharged by renewable. That's kind of that's the circle, and not having to be charging those batteries with gas. That would be counterproductive. So, two things that by having enough local generation, or a combination of local generation and battery storage, that we can free up the 200 megawatts of transmission we have to be almost exclusive import capability for renewables. And at this point in time, because of where we're at with our generation, we don't have the ability to store it. We're barely able to use every megawatt of that to keep the lights on a daily basis. So the ability for us to get some breathing room, then take the renewables in across those two transmission lines, also to charge our batteries with that power as well, that begins to get you that clean concept and that renewable concept a lot purer than putting batteries in and then charging them up with fossil. So our objective would be to be able to free up those transmission lines to bring in renewables, and in both locations where our transmission lines, they are pretty heavy with opportunities, whether that's solar and wind in one area, small hydro in another, some geothermal. We have the ability to use that transmission to its fullest extent to meet our RPS and hopefully be able to charge those batteries. Then we're using the gas-fired generation to help us meet base load, free up that transmission, meet our reserve requirements. And correct me if I missed something here, Mark. And that begins to give you that look of that integrated package. And across those lines come today for us wind, geothermal. We've got small hydro. We don't have a lot of solar now. It all depends on what the project is and what's the best benefit for the city. The reality is RPS is the sources of renewable energy are solar, wind, small hydro, geothermal, and biogas. There is no requirement that you have a diverse portfolio. It's smart to have a diverse portfolio. There's no requirement that says you must have X% of one of those sources over another. We could run 100% wind. I think it would be foolish, but we could run 100% wind. We could run 100% bio. We could run 100% geothermal, and those two, bio and geothermal, are less intermittent. We could use a process to make those. We don't have that kind of firming and shaping. The reality is we're not required to have any one of those commodities more than the other, as long as our portfolio is made up of X percentage, 50% by the year 2030, of those 5 different commodities.
I mean, I understand and I agree we're not going to be charging the batteries with gas power.
That's our hope. That was our hope.
Well, what about local solar? And I'm going to ask about that in a minute, but wouldn't now this idea of 191 megawatt gas and 50 megawatt of battery be more conducive to try to put some sort of a local solar to charge that battery when we need it?
Well, and certainly Dave can talk a little bit more about local solar. We currently have 11?
I believe it's 14 megawatts.
14 megawatts of local solar. But for us on a grid scale solar project, while we would definitely continue to, I would definitely recommend we continue to offer incentives to those who are willing to put that on their roof and to do that. And to also look at opportunities for us as an agency to do things like public land that we could put it on. And that, not to say that we haven't, because we certainly have. But in order to get where you need to be, where we need to be, you're talking about a grid scale project. And we're not putting a grid scale project in Glendale. We have a photograph where we show you a 250 megawatt project, which is 30% efficiency because they don't have batteries at this particular one. The amount of land is it's 5 to 6 acres a megawatt. We certainly can continue to promote and try to incentivize to the extent we can, and certainly the council could decide to spend general fund money and further incentivize rooftop solar. But at the end of the day, it has its limitations. And I don't know, Dave, if you want to talk a little bit about just rooftop solar comment. I think he's got a slide. I know you had some question. You want to ask a question?
Well, no, I mean, it seems every time we're talking about rooftop solar, somebody's going all the way to the 250 megawatts. And seriously, I'm never asking anybody to put 250 megawatts of solar in Glendale, whether on public land or on everybody else's roof. I'm talking, could we come up with a number of a rooftop solar in Glendale that would work, that would be environmentally friendly, and meet our needs?
I think we have a projection based on.
So since 2002, a total of about 15 megawatts of rooftop solar has been installed in Glendale. The city doesn't have, and in terms of local generation of resources that are available, it's really the gas turbines or it's rooftop solar. Okay, if you're going to have solar local, you have to be able to deal with the intermittency of it. The city doesn't have the ability to compel development, in the EIR, final EIR, We talked about, here's what the city-owned properties are and the availability to develop additional solar, and as you can see, it wasn't very much, so we did look at that. When you talk about rooftop solar on private residences and businesses, the city doesn't have the ability to compel people to build rooftop solar. They can incentivize it, and the city already does that. They have a program to do that. But it's not like we can sit there and say, well, in this year, we're going to build this much solar and so on. The other issue that plays into it, and you can go look at, the state maintains a website, talks about distributed generation statistics, and we talked about that in EIR, and you know, and rooftop solar runs about $4.50 a watt. And so depending on how much you do, you know, cost becomes a consideration at some point.
And let me just ask Dave, we did make some assumptions on growth of rooftop solar in the city based on today.
Well, some people have suggested that, you know, we could have 50 megawatts of...
No, I was thinking from Craig Keenan and some of the estimates based on state. The growth rate is rather low, but it's there.
I don't recall those numbers offhand, but, you know, I believe what we concluded in the final EIR was that, you know, that you don't get enough growth to offset even one of the units at Grayson.
And then just let me add, a lot of our agreements with existing solar, there's nothing coming back to us. The consumer is using it themselves. They're not giving the energy back to us. There's an offset to that, obviously. But you were talking about being able to possibly use that to charge the batteries, and you're just not seeing it come back to us. And that's an issue because then it's not RPS eligible because we're not buying it back.
I mean, this is where I'm going with it. And I saw these points when I was reading the responses to the questions. First, that $4.50 on rooftop, well, we're not paying that. The homeowner wants to pay most of it.
Well, yeah, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to pay it. It doesn't happen for free, right?
Yeah, but it's a willing homeowner. So they figure they did their math, they'll save money, they won't
Well, that's
use
available to them today.
Well, I understand.
And it's only a certain people that are going to be able to afford that.
Right,
You know, so when you're asking, do we make projections with reliability being the primary issue based on what may happen, could happen, or what somebody may want to put on their roof? To me, that's not very prudent. Now, can we incentivize it? Try as best we can to get more on? Utilize that to help come back and charge those batteries? I don't disagree with that.
I'm trying to get there.
Okay.
So the point I was trying to make is $4.50, but your argument was it's too expensive. Well, I understand, but there's an argument about it's not feeding back. That's fine. But the argument about too expensive, well, it's not coming out of the city's pocket. It's coming out of the homeowner. That's one argument. I'll just put that out.
Correct.
But also, you said the city can't mandate. And we've got here Lancaster in 2014 mandates small-scale rooftop on all new construction. I know Glendale doesn't have too many constructions, but I'm just pointing those out. Santa Monica in 2016 and San Francisco in 2017. They all mandate some sort of a rooftop solar on new constructions.
Correct.
So it's not correct to say the city council can't force. It can if it wants to.
We were referring to existing. So for looking forward to new construction, absolutely, we've already had that conversation with the council about the potential of changing the building codes and all that entails. That's a whole separate discussion for them. Could it be done? Yes. We were talking about existing. When we said too expensive, we weren't talking about too expensive for us. We're talking it's too expensive for the average consumer. And we believe that, and the state will tell you that.
But this is a project that's going to be serving us for 40 years. Why not integrate that information and present it to city council and see if city council itself wants to tackle both of these issues together?
You mean the building code changes?
No, mandating as, saying, well, you could theoretically have 40 or 50 megawatts of rooftop solar be adopted in the next 5, 10, or 15 years if you do these code changes. And let City Council decide. This way, you presented all the alternatives of the EIR to City Council. City Council will study all the options and make its decision. That's all I'm trying to point out at.
And the city council can do that, and we have talked to them, we'd be happy
They're not
to
going
do
to
that.
know if we don't, if
We've
the
already had
experts
that
don't-
discussion. We've had that discussion with them. But I think where you started, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the 191 with the 50 megawatts of battery, and then look at some of these other issues like enhancing the rooftop solar program. My answer would be whether it's rooftop solar, whether it's renewable from another source, be it local or outside of our jurisdiction, we would absolutely be going after those kind of things. And rooftop solar development, to the extent that we can enhance that, we'd certainly look at that. It's just what we're saying is to try to put, and I think, again, did I understand you when you said the 191, the 50 megawatts of battery, kind of enhance the rooftop solar, look for some other options, maybe public land, maybe community solar, maybe other project. That's the integrated approach we've been talking about. And we're absolutely not saying we shouldn't do that. We were just saying you can't put all your eggs in that basket when you talk about reliability, rate impacts, counting on somebody else. You know, new construction. In Lancaster, there's a lot of new construction. I don't know that we're going to have as much new construction here, but we could certainly do a lot of those different things. We're going to have the public benefit charge budget before the council in a very short time, where we're going to look at talking about the enhancements for both rooftop solar, for anything that, let's say battery storage. You know, behind the meter distributed energy kind of thing, it goes to batteries now too, and people are combining that. So we're going to have a conversation about the budget for that and what possibilities we have there.
And again, I'm going to continue because in the answer to the EIRs, I saw how much we are limited in incentivizing because of tax issues and Prop 26 issues that I read in the answer. You know, council might have other reasons to do something about Prop 26 and deal with that measure. Why prohibit? I mean, these responses are in the answers based on new data that was presented. Questions were asked. And the answers to those questions were, well, you can't do it because you got to change the code. Well, give the option to council to change the code. No, you can't incentivize more because you run foul of Prop 26. Well, give the option to council, see if they want to put a ballot measure to deal with Prop 26. They may have other issues for that as well. Why aren't we putting all these in front of City Council?
Well, the ballot measure on Prop 26, we haven't had a discussion on.
No, I know.
But as far as the potential to look at building codes and the future construction, we've talked about that. When you talk about the incentivization of the solar, we had that discussion with more than one council member at a council meeting, to which I said, we're bringing the public benefit charge budget. That would be a perfect time to talk about it. We are limited and we can't use ratepayer money to do it. We can use PBC money to do it. Could the council raise the PBC charge? Sure. Sure. It's akin to raising your electric rate, but they could raise that portion of it on a percentage basis to generate more money. Mm-hmm. And they could also take the option of using general fund money, which we also proposed to them. That's an option they have. And so when we get into the budget process and talk about that public benefit charge budget, we'll discuss at least the budgetary issues there.
Okay.
So again, I think what you started to talk about is that integration plan that we've been talking about. Go with the lesser generation. Again, we've got the 250 out there. You choose to talk about that. If that's where the recommendation you want to make, if that's where the council wants to go, my position is it is very doable. Today, a lot different than it was 4 years ago. We can make that option work. That's my response. And then if we're able to take, whether it's the open transmission lines and bring more renewables in, use local generation, local renewable to charge those batteries, that'd be excellent. That'd be excellent.
Commissioners, questions?
Yeah, Mr. Zern, well, historically, we haven't replaced these units. Why they didn't, I mean, maybe you were not there, why they didn't replace on time?
Sir, I wish I could answer it. I wasn't here. There are a number of reports that were developed that we have gone through and looked at for the last 26 years, all of which indicated the equipment was at the end of its life based on what the manufacturer's life is. You know, the city just made different decisions. Like I said, if we could go back, I would recommend maybe we replace a unit, 25 years ago, and then, 5 years or 10 years later, 7 years later, you replace another unit. We didn't do that, and unfortunately, I can't unwind that. But I don't know exactly why. There was, I think, just a decision that it's a big project to undertake. It's a significant issue to wrestle with. But you see the results of when you kick that can down the road, it just becomes a bigger and bigger issue that you have to deal with. Other agencies, Pasadena notably, LA, they have systematic repowering over time. And the impacts are a lot less from a financial and a construction standpoint. It also gives them time to better evaluate what's happening for the future and see if there's other alternatives where they're not forced into a situation that may be, because you've let things go so long. But again, different decisions get made in different places, and unfortunately, it's sometimes easy to be an armchair quarterback. Let me say that. Again, for me to sit up here and say, I don't know why they didn't do it, is a bit playing armchair quarterback in this situation. There may be a lot of reasons why they didn't, from financial to operational, but the fact of the matter remains, as we sit here today, that would have been a much preferred method of repowering Grayson. And if you do it incrementally, you even get to the point where you see maybe we don't need that third or fourth unit. Maybe we can get by doing this. But when you let equipment go to it's almost 80 years old, you're just setting yourself up for a problem.
So if I can ask a question. So I guess comment first. So first I would say, as compared to when we started this conversation last fall, it's encouraging. CEQA at its heart is it's an alternative analysis, right? Mm-hmm. And looking at those alternatives that are least environmentally impactful or environmentally preferable. So it's encouraging that at least between then and now, one of those alternatives has become a little bit more viable, I suppose, not as a result of us reshaping the alternative, but really the cost of the alternative.
As a primary driver, yes.
And so have you analyzed the cost of that alternative number 5, the 200 or 191 plus 50? And if so, how does that compare to the price tag associated with your preferred recommendation?
So based on, again, we're trying to take into consideration the actual batteries themselves, the installation, the inverters. Do we put them inside a building? Do we not put them inside a building? I think that we can look at anywhere from a $30 to $35 million savings.
$35 million.
Over having a unit there. So, that's nothing to sniff at. Batteries may, and by the time we bid it, it could be even lower. That's a conservative estimate, but it could be even lower. We do have numbers for what the generating unit costs. We have numbers for what the construction to install that generating unit costs. So we know what that would be. Take that out of the equation. Then you have to add back in what would the batteries, the installation, the interconnection of that be. So conservatively, we could be in that $30 to $35 million savings range.
Okay, appreciate that. So also, there's quite a bit of interest in this project, right? So
correct.
Over 1,200 total comments, verbal and written comments from residents of Glendale. And so, my question for you, I didn't hear in the presentation really how those comments have been addressed. So I'd like to be able to give you that opportunity to share with folks, either through a mitigation, associated with the proposed alternative, or reshaping of the proposal itself. How would you summarize the way in which you've taken those, over 1,000 different comments, and either expressed those and responded to those through a mitigation or else some other means.
I think it would be best if I have Mike Weber come up and give you a little bit of background on that, and maybe Lisa could help back him on that as well, because Lisa and Mike, along with many others, spent a tremendous amount of time working on this. So I would defer to their expertise and experience.
Yep, thank you. There were really, out of those 1,100 plus comment letters that you received, plus the verbal, plus the commission's comments that we took orally the last time we were here, I believe that was last fall, we divided that up into 3 main categories of response to comments. It's included is section 9 of the final EIR. As we recognize, a lot of the comments that we received were similar in nature, questions or concerns about a specific environmental factor, such as air quality. So we took all of those comments that were very similar in nature, and we grouped them together and prepared topical responses to those. And you see that as the first section of our response to comments as part of the final EIR. And there are topical responses 1 through 16. In addition to those responses, ones that were not categorized as part of those topics, we responded to individually within the EIR as well, and that's included in the oral comments that we received as well. To answer your question about mitigation measures and responding to those comments, in all cases, responding to those comments in terms of changes to the EIR were really editorial in nature, removed some references to rules and regulations that really do not apply to the project. And the information, we really provide a lot of clarification to the alternatives that we evaluated and why we did not choose to evaluate some of the other alternatives that the public has brought up. The conclusion is, in all that information and responding to all those comments, making edits to the final EIR, it did not result in any new environmental impact that was not previously analyzed or disclosed. It did not substantially increase a previously disclosed environmental impact report, nor did it require any new mitigation measures to reduce a potentially significant impact. So it did not result in any substantial changes to the environmental analysis itself or its conclusions.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You had more.
So I want to, if we could bring up the how much capacity is needed slide, which has the table that kind of outlines where our generation comes from, or where our capacity comes from.
The middle row, second to the last on the right. Right
That's
there.
the one. Yep, that's the one. So I think for me, the source of any and all dispute on this project is how big it needs to be, really. Because I think most people see the transmission access, Grayson Unit 9, our share of Magnolia, and they see, well, we've got a 63 megawatt gap. So why are we building a 200 megawatt power plant to deal with that gap? And then, so I want to drill down into the risk of the loss of the largest contingency and the second largest contingency, because I think that that's really where the heart of the matter is, right? So the first off, I want to, how often are we derated? How often do we lose access to those, that Pacific Northwest intertie?
Based on the temperature, those lines get derated on a frequent basis, whether they're derated at 50% or 70% or 80%. But when it's hot, when we have a 350 megawatt peak, that's when they get derated.
And logistically, how does that work? What happens when those are derated? Do you guys get an email an hour before it happens, and it's just
right? It's all a matter of heat transfer. When the line gets hot, it starts to dip. Heat transfer corrodes the insulation on the windings. That results in decay of the line. So they derate the line, and once they derate the line, they notify the participants of the derate, and we get cut substantially.
But what's the time horizon on that? What you get notified, and then how long do you need before you lose access to power along that line?
We can find out a day before if it's anticipating that it's going to be hot. Depending on how much transmission is being used, will determine if it gets further cut, and that can happen inside the hour.
So you've got 24 hours essentially to figure out how to replace those electrons with something
No,
else.
inside the hour. That means
means
I have to do it in 10 minutes.
I see. Okay, and that can be as much as 50%. How high does that how high does that D-rate go? Does that go up to 100% sometimes?
When the line trips, yes. It goes down to 0. The Mactalic return isn't in service right now, so when we go down to 0, and if we have 100 megawatts of energy coming down that line, we're required to, in 10 minutes, rebalance our system, and that means we would have to get that 100 megawatts back.
And then the second largest contingency, the 71 megawatts, where does that come from?
So the second largest contingency, or the N-1-1, is a concept that's a little bit harder to understand. So the N1 condition happens immediately, and you have 10 minutes to respond to that problem, and once that happens, then you have a new contingency. So if the DC line goes down, and we then recover that 100 megawatts, as soon as you recover that 100 megawatts and the DC line is still down, you have to go to what is the next electric contingency. And that next electric contingency could be the generator that we're proposing, which is 71 megawatts.
That's a combined cycle unit. That's what's being, we proposed
so
as being the N1 minus 1.
So line drips, that one's out for maintenance, and then we still have to have the contingency for the second contingency.
You're required, according to NERC, and the WECC requirement is to make sure that you are not a burden to the grid.
And whose burden is that? Is that GWP's burden, or is that LA's burden that's transferred to us by contract?
That's our burden.
Okay, so every individual utility even within a balancing authority has a NERC or FERC obligation to deliver that power on.
I would rather let council.
Yeah,
define
and
that
that's where I want to, because I want to talk about risk factors, what we're legally obligated to do.
John Stickman, you probably recognize my voice from some of our calls. Yeah, so what we have is we have every transmission service agreement that we have in place with the various suppliers, whether it be LA, IPP, Hoover, et cetera, it has an obligation to provide reserves. And that obligation predates the concept of a BAA, predates the concept of AB 1890, which created the CAISO, because these contracts go back to the 1980s. AB 1890 was 1997. The Energy Policy Act was 2005. So these are old obligations that are continuing into the future. That's where these obligations lie. And if you look at LA, if we were just a full requirements customer of LA, which we can't be, but just assume that, they would expect us still to provide those, and if we didn't, they would go to the market to try to provide those services if you look on their tariff. So the idea that we can renege on those obligations and not do these things, that's really, I think, where you're focused, Commissioner Hale. And there's multiple levels of exposure. So it's very common in this new paradigm under the WEC and NERC standards to delegate obligations. With our BASA in place, what we've done is we've essentially said, LA, we have this long tradition. We're a metered subsystem. We're a system within a system, a hole in the donut, if you will, okay? And we have a meter that interconnects us. And to the extent that we lean on LA for resources because we're not meeting our load, we pay a fee. If in an unusual circumstance, LA, uses some of our resources, which can happen here and there, they lean on us, we give them, and then there's a true up. So that's the way it operates. And why this matters is because as this, hole in the donut, this metered subsystem that is meeting the BA obligations that you see under the WEC standards, that's where you get into meeting the N-1 and N-1-1. And it is single largest contingency. That's what the BA standards say. And in fact, WEC is unique. WEC has its own BAL standards that are a little more stringent than other places. And in order for us to meet those and not be sued by LA for breach or IPP for breach or Hoover, et cetera, we need resources. And, I'm here, I'm agnostic as to whatever resource you pick. I'm just here to tell you, you're a load pocket. That's what we call it in the industry. There's limited transmission going to a pocket of load, and because you're a load pocket, you only have really one choice, and that choice is to develop a resource. And for me, like I said, I'm agnostic. Whatever these experts do and decide, but they have to figure out what that is, because without it, we risk significant legal and as well as regulatory exposure. And just so you get a feel for it, you'll maybe hear from other folks who'll say, well, LA's the BA and it's their problem. Well, as you've heard, we've reached out to LA just to help us supply a small amount during Q3, and they said they can't do it. And I want you to understand why, because it's very practical. When we have a problem, LA has a problem. When we have a problem, Burbank has a problem. Same for Pasadena, et cetera. Okay, so if the PDCI goes down, that's what everyone, all those utilities, that's one of their single largest contingencies. So when we give them a call and we say, hey, can we lean on you? They say, well, we're in the same situation. When it's really hot here, well, it's really hot in LA. It's really hot. So these are the circumstances that get exacerbated. So honestly, when I look at this, I think this is a conservative view of the world. In the reliability world, you like to see, N-2. And I won't get into the detail of that, but that is a situation where, there's even more resources set aside. And the reason you do it when you're a load pocket is because it comes fast and furious, and us as the commission and us as the staff, we're obliged to make sure the lights stay on. That's our first and foremost. Then it is for reasonable, adjusting reasonable rates and, looking at the resource mix and those things. But if we don't keep the lights on, we're not doing what we need to do. So, that's really where this is. And it's unfortunate because of the history. It really goes back to the early 80s, and I've been at this for 21 years, and I've been fighting LA to get what I'll call a bigger pipe into our system. And, you've heard, we've sued LA, we've done all kinds of things, but it's not an easy proposition, and the reason is because it's difficult for LA. Because in order for them to upgrade these lines, because they're just like us, we're in the same situation, they have to deal with the environmental impacts and all those things. And I mentioned this at the last meeting. In my world, we say building generation, you have one landowner to deal with. Building transmission, you have thousands. And so when we go to LA, that's their response. They say, this is your problem. You have the ability to fix this. So that's the situation. And like I say, I'm agnostic. Whatever these folks decide, the resource is, but unfortunately, we're a load pocket, limited transmission, and if we can figure out how to get that local generation, I think we would be in the position to address Mr. Kadikian's concerns about, this is your insurance policy. You have that resource sitting there, whatever it is. Now you can go and say, let's develop solar, over a 7 or 10 year term and figure out ways that we can incentivize people. But we're 100% sure we're not running afoul of agreements, et cetera. But at least we know that we're set so that we have that flexibility. Right now, we're sort of painted into a corner because of the history of it. So that's really the moving parts there.
And what are the remedies if we fail? What are the remedies if we become unreliable, or if our load pocket starts to threaten to destabilize the rest of the grid?
Well, so the way it works at WEC is if they find that an example is the IID example. You can get with $100 million per incident per day. Or sorry, $1 million per incident per day. I believe IID ended up settling for $20 million, but they put another $15-20 million in mitigation measures. And that, the issues that they addressed are not nearly as catastrophic as the things that we're talking about. And the reason being is because the basin, the LA basin, would go down. If we're not meeting our obligations, there's only so much LA can do. And my concern is back to, you lose the PDCI, maybe Magnolia goes down and it's a 110-degree day. So
and I think just to reiterate on your question, you're going to get a fine, whatever that may be. $1 million a day is the most. Sometimes those are negotiable if you talk to them about mitigation measures. But you're going to get fined, and you're going to have to put, you don't offer a mitigation. You will be told to put a mitigation in, because the bottom line will be, this will not happen again. You have to take the steps to ensure it doesn't happen again. And that has to be done pretty quickly. Again, with IID, I think they acted within 12 months. They had a 12-month period, if you can imagine, to put in a battery unit, interconnect it, and have it done and ready to go, in addition to the upgrades they had to make to the transmission line to ensure that that wouldn't happen again.
No, yeah, absolutely. And the other element is the breach of contracts that you would run into, not to mention local liability, which, I mean, class action lawsuits, all those things, it can get pretty hairy. So that's, those are the circumstances. And I wish we had a bigger pipeline, more bigger pipelines coming in, but we at this time we don't.
And Mr. Hale, as long as we have this chart up, I might add something that I didn't cover, we didn't cover in our presentation. This is not based on any projected load growth. This is projected now. Now, while you may say, well, the trend has been for between conservation, advanced technology, the automated metering infrastructure that allows people to become more actively involved in their own usage and conserve, that consumption has been going down, some cases at best plateaus, and other cases going down. But you have to understand that we're on the verge of what could possibly be the single largest increase in electrical usage that we've seen in a long, long time, and that's the electrification of the transportation system. That is being pushed at every single level. And again, we've talked about this before. That attacks what is the single biggest issue when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and to harmful emissions, and that's automobiles. Whether it's LA, California, United States, or the world. That's the single largest, by far. So the ability to be prepared, again, not all gas, but some combination, make sure our contingencies are in place to be able to start dealing with this electrification. And it isn't about you and me buying a Tesla. This is about bus systems, school bus systems. They're looking at over-the-road freight transportation. Southern California Edison is looking at electrification of the 5 corridor from the Oregon border to the Mexican border. They want to make this available. Tesla has a truck. Ford has a truck ready to come out. The automobile industry is going in that direction. So if anything, you're going to see loads start to go up. And you're going to see that duck curve, that time period is going to change as well. But that's a good thing. That gets gasoline-powered cars off the road. That's our biggest concern and our biggest issue. But it is going to require more electrical generation of whatever mode that is. But it also is going to take our contingencies and change those as well. There's also comments about or looks at electrifying what I call building comfort. So using strictly electricity to heat buildings and heat water, which is primarily a gas function today. Southern California Edison is certainly on record as saying they're going to go after that market. They are going to go after and look at maybe building code changes as well that say new facilities have to be all electric. And that's going to also change load, especially when you look at the emissions of the gas, the availability of the gas, and those kind of things. So again, I think you're going to have these contingencies that are going to be even greater, and we have to be able to be prepared to deal with those in an integrated plan. Again, I'm not saying it's all gas, but an integrated plan. And so I just want to point out, when we were looking at peak loads and load capacity, we didn't factor in any load increase, any upticks in our load demand.
Commissioner Hale, I just want to make sure that you understand that if we do not meet a contingency, we will be forced to manually load shed. So it's not just the fines. We will be forced to actually shut parts of the city down, and there's huge ramifications for doing that. We've actually not had to manually load shed ever in Glendale.
Yep.
Yes. So assuming that this project moves along the timeline that you guys have in mind, when is the go live for the new generating units? When do they go online?
Our hope is it would be spring of 2021. That's a conservative number. Actually, my hope is end of 2020, but to push the contractor hard. So let's say, spring of 2021.
So I want to talk a little bit about Unit 8 at the existing Grayson, because it seems like we have 102 megawatts of generating stations there, but there's an AQMD rule which is going to make those unable to run any further. So what's the reason for the retirement there? Is it the pending AQMD action? Are they difficult to maintain? Are they unreliable? What's the recommendation? What's the source
Those
of the
two are
recommendation?
actually tied. Mark can talk about this a little bit too. He's much more familiar. Those units are also tied to units 1 and 2, so you've got this synergy between those. Currently, 8A is not operational, and it is beyond. It is now a safety issue. I see, some of my employees in the audience who do yeoman's work on a daily basis to make sure that plant runs. But they obviously have a concern, and the union, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, has a concern. So OSHA has been down visiting us more often than we would have ever hoped on some of these units, including 8A. And it's now at a point in time where I don't believe that we're going to be able to operate 8A under a condition that's acceptable to OSHA, which we shouldn't. Right. I'll tell you right now, as a general manager, I wouldn't ever, no matter what, even if it's a once in a million situation. We're not going to put our employees in that particular situation. I'm going to put any of my employees in that situation. So you've got a operational issue, you've got a condition issue, you've got an age issue, and now you've got a safety issue. So those are all factoring into that. Mark, do you want to add anything on?
So 8A and 8BC are combined cycle units, and they use residual heat to go to our 1 and 2 units, and 1 and 2 units are the 1940s units. So they're actually the oldest units. And what you would have to do is you would have to keep them running so that you can put steam over to the old side to keep them running and keep them hot. We have AQMD restrictions to prevent us from being able to use 8A and BC 24/7. So we would have to shut those units down every day and start them up every day, which they're not designed to do. And even if they were brand new, they would hurt the units. So I don't think that they would survive being able to operate that way. And 8BC's controls are out of date. They can't fix them anymore. We have a superheater tube issue on 8BC. So while they're the newer of the generators, I believe that the 40s generators are actually better than the 70s generators. They're in bad shape. And they blow tubes all the time.
Okay.
Commissioners, any further questions? We can potentially move to public comment. I know that, we've been meeting now for almost 2 hours. Sorry. We've been meeting now for almost 2 hours. I want to be sensitive to the fact that there are folks here who have waited patiently and also have young children with them. So if my fellow commissioners don't object, I think we could move to public comment, and then if we have any follow-up questions from commissioners following that, we could then take those questions. So without delay, public comment. First speaker is Susanna Liberty.
Hi, thanks for this opportunity to comment. My name is Susanna Liberty, 632 Ivy Street, 91204. We have a 3-generational household. I've sat here today, as I have at many of these meetings, and listened, trying to be respectfully quiet when I've heard things that are just blowing my mind. First of all, I would like to point out that you guys have known for a very long time that we needed more energy and we needed to get rid of some of this pollution. I cannot understand why renewable energy sources are not being given really serious consideration here, that we're still stuck on fossil fuels. It makes me, and we're being told that it's really not possible to do renewable energy. It reminds me of the past. I'm pretty old, even though I dye my hair. You can't see my white hair. I've been around a long time. What's going on here makes me think of historical comments like, women can't lead governments, businesses, etc., because they have variable hormonal states. Homosexuals can't fight wars. Men can't fly. All of these things have been proven wrong. But at the same time, it's taken a lot of battle. I hear these people who are entrenched in their ideas, afraid to move on to new science. I'm not a scientist. I have a doctorate in a whole nother field. It's not science. So I can't really interpret what you guys are saying, but I don't believe it anymore. So many of the statements that have come from these people who are promulgating this idea of retooling and rebuilding Grayson Power, I've lost my thought. I'm sorry, I'm too old to do this, and I'm too frustrated. But my understanding is that the people who have been addressing us tonight, who've been at this work for so long, that they really have at least an emotional investment in it. I often wonder who really benefits from staying into the fossil fuel field and not moving on to renewable energy. Cities all over the world have become, he's not listening, is he? Cities all over the world have become 100% renewable. Why can't Glendale? This is the best country in the world. We live in the sunniest environment in the world. I heard a lot about drop-off. Don't understand why we haven't developed or haven't looked into the batteries that can hold the energy we've already developed. I don't get it. I just don't get it. We're putting our children at risk with this pollution. We don't need to. Somebody's just got a really big investment in continuing on with this fossil fuel business. And yeah, nobody's arguing that this plant doesn't have to be fixed. We're not saying that. We're saying please look at different, and speed up the actions. I don't understand why it's taken 10, 12, 20 years to get to this point. Speed up the action. We can do it. And I really encourage you folks to disapprove this proposal so that City Council at least gets to hear that you have a lot of concerns and that other avenues can be gone down. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for your comments.
Ms. Law, just to make a comment, because I know we'll go through this and then get back to rebut, but this, first of all, nowhere has it ever been said that it's not possible to do renewable energy. Can you put that chart up? And I didn't do this because it's a bit redundant. I don't know where that comment would come from, but this is the 2016 power content label for the city of Glendale and our neighbors. That's us, 47%.
Okay.
Obviously much higher, and I'm just making a statement to the commission. I think the speaker is finished. Is that right?
Okay, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
President? But we'd be happy to provide that graph to you, and as you can see, we far exceed any of our neighbors, and in fact, our neighbors also are, and the state of California by a wide margin, and most of our neighbors are much heavier into coal and gas than we are. And you can simply look their power content label up online through the California Energy Commission. But at no time did we ever say renewable was not possible, nor that we would not take that path. We have been aggressively taking that path, and the City Council has been outstanding in giving us direction to continue in our efforts.
And okay, I hear that, and yet you say that nothing has been done to alter your plans in alignment with anything that the citizens have commented on. We have had no effect in our comments on your plan. That was stated here.
We need to move to the next speaker.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Ms. Liberty. Larry Morehouse.
Thank you. My name is Larry Morehouse. I'm a resident of the city. I was the plant superintendent for the Grayson Power Plant from 1988 until 2008. So I understand everything that everybody's been talking about. There's a lot of hard decisions that you're going to have to make in order to get us out of the problem that we have. One of the things Mr. Zern mentioned that before he became the general manager, he didn't understand why GWP didn't do something several years ago, so we wasn't in a position that we're in now. Well, it was the general manager that we had at the time. He had other goals. He spent $85 million to automate all the meter reading and was able to get rid of a few meter readers. And I objected to that at the time, and I said, why don't you spend some of that money at the Grayson Power Plant to replace some of the older units? Well, he wasn't in a mind to do that, and that was when I decided to retire. So I've been following this project that Steve's been trying to get off the ground, and I see a lot of hard decisions that's going to have to be made to finally get us there. One of the things that I think could be done is bring another consultant in, or an existing consultant, and take a look at the Grayson Power Plant to see if there is a portion of it that can be maintained for a few years, in addition to adding a new unit, instead of tearing the whole plant down and starting all over. To me, this is a high risk for the city to do that because of interference with bringing power in to us, and that might have a problem with that in the 3 years, or I predict 4 years instead of the 3 years it's going to take GWP to get this done. If you do decide to go along with the recommendation that GWP is making, there are several issues in the project that I don't think Mr. Zern is aware of, or their contractor is aware of, that needs to be addressed. I think they'll run into these problems as they go through the project, but all of these will come up change orders, additional costs to the project, and I would make myself available to GWP and their contractor to assist them through, to be able to avoid some of these problems that you will see if you do that. The other issue the citizens of Glendale have brought up is you can't talk about Grayson without talking about the landfill. And the reason for that is we burned the landfill gas at the Grayson Power Plant. At the time, the general manager of GWP, the one, not the one Zern replaced, but the one before him, he objected to us burning the landfill gas at the power plant and was kind of kept out to the side, and the city manager told him to be quiet. When the gas line shows up at the site, you will burn it. And I think it wasn't too long after that he quit. I thought it wasn't such a good idea at the time,
Your
but
time is
after
up,
we
sir.
did it,
Sir, your time is up. Can you just finish your thought, please, concisely?
yeah,
Thank
after
you.
we did it, I found out it was really one of the best things that we done with the old power plant. So I know the decisions that GWP is having to make to do this it's not a hard decision. It's hard because there's a lot to do to be able to get to where they want to go. And it's going to be a challenge to everybody to, to get there.
Thank you.
Depending on the decisions that you make.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Glenn Webb.
My name is Glenn Webb, 1670 Arbalest Drive. I was going to talk about the hard copy that I gave you here tonight, but I'm only going to read one of them because I want to comment on some of the things that have been said here this evening. Included in the 6,284 pages of the EIR are 3,200 pages and some 1,200 comments. And I read every one of them. And the overwhelming majority, 99.985% of them, to be more precise, are strongly negative. And they can be summarized very simply. We do not need 262 megawatts of new gas to deliver reliable, adequate energy supply to Glendale. We want a clean energy future for Glendale and our grandchildren, one that emits zero pollutants, zero greenhouse gas emissions, and brings us lower energy bills. Please listen to those who know how to do it. I am one that knows how to do it, and I am in the process of submitting a very detailed plan called Zero Carbon Glendale to the City Council that involves solar energy, distributed solar, a distributed energy resource with a new grid integration plan, and considerable amount of battery storage, which is the only answer today to shaping and leveling of solar power resources. There was a statement made tonight that we're continuing to incentivize solar energy in Glendale. And if you go on the Glendale Water and Power website under the Solar Incentives Program, the first thing you read is, quote, "The program is closed." So that statement is not strictly accurate. Battery storage has not been considered in this EIR and has not been considered in the Grayson Repowering Plan. In fact, it's being discouraged by Glendale Water and Power. Currently, the best device on the market today is a Tesla Powerwall 2, which is a 14 kilowatt hour system designed for the home to provide not only solar storage, but also storage for emergency purposes. That device is currently prohibited from installation in Glendale by GWP. I have written a 10-page letter detailing all of the reasons why that's not a good idea, talking about the hundreds of other cities all over the world that are aggressively installing these devices to help them out with not only power leveling, but with emergency backup storage. There's a project in the state of South Australia to place 50,000 homes with solar power and battery backup storage, and a new integrated grid such that all of that battery storage can be shaped and controlled by the central facility. And everybody that says it can't be done, or it's impractical, or it's too expensive, just take a look at what South Australia is doing. Take a look at what San Jose is doing, or Burlington, Vermont. They're all zero carbon cities. Well, San Jose is on the way. Burlington, Vermont is a zero carbon. Aspen, Colorado is a zero carbon city. There are hundreds of cities all over the world that are heading in this direction. And battery storage is the key to all of it. There have been some wildly overestimated pricing put out by Glendale Water and Power to justify gas turbines. You just heard tonight the battery storage costs up to $1 million a megawatt hour. Well, the system that was put in South Australia is being put in right now, costs $100 a megawatt hour. The Tesla Powerwall 2, retail price is $360 a megawatt hour. The Tesla Power Pack that's in my Model S, $150 a megawatt hour. And soon those prices will be below $100 a megawatt hour. So costs are being exaggerated to justify the turbines. You heard tonight, somebody mentioned $4.62 a watt hour. I'm sorry, $4.62 a watt for solar installations. Those prices right now are under $3 a watt, actually. And solar installations in the home can now be put in for zero cost to the homeowner. With a 15-year lease, zero cost to the homeowner. My zero carbon plan will have Glendale at zero carbon resources by the year 2030. It will provide higher peak capacity than we have currently and significantly higher reliability through a distributed energy resource and a new control system for our grid. The EIR redo for this plan, I'd be happy to mark up the existing one at no cost to the city.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Appreciate your
Madam
comments.
President, if I may make a comment, because again, these are things that keep getting perpetuated and at some point in time need to be addressed. The comment that we had not looked at any batteries, I just got finished talking to you about what one of the options that included 50 megawatts of batteries, putting that in perspective. The issue of the Tesla Powerwall in a residential application, we're looking at that. There aren't hundreds of utilities, at least in our area, that do this. The city of Los Angeles has not yet approved it. They are still looking at it. I will tell you what one of the main issues is employee safety, lineman safety. And I can guarantee you I will never, ever put one of those men's life in harm's way for a battery. No. I mean, look, the statements were made. The other issue is South Australia. I'd be happy to take time and explain to you the facts about South Australia because they're not being told. But the one fact that's being left out is, in addition to all that South Australia is doing, because they put themselves into a precarious situation, is they're building a 250 megawatt gas-fired plant. That's included with their 250 megawatts of solar, with their battery backup. They're also building a 250 megawatt gas plant. That's a fact. That plant is already under construction. So tell the story is fine. Let's tell the whole story, though. Let's be accurate in what we're saying.
I'm sorry, sir, we need to move on. Evan Gillespie.
I want to make one last comment about the Tesla
President
Powerwall,
Law,
too. That has
President
to
Law,
meet-
I'm sorry, Mr. Webb,
All right.
President Law, we can't engage in debate,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah.
If the commission members have questions of the speaker or staff, they're welcome to ask it, but we cannot be engaging in question and answer
Correct.
debate.
Mr. Gillespie.
You know, one way we could help reduce the need for Grayson would be to turn down the air conditioning in here. It is freezing. And if I'm shaking, it's not because I'm nervous, it's because I'm literally quite cold. But my name is Evan Gillespie. I work for the Sierra Club, and I'm here to say I support reliable power. In my house, it's because my kids, if they don't get their 20-minute Paw Patrol fix every day, there is chaos, and so we need it. But I say all that to lay out that, you know, where the Sierra Club stands on this, we're here because we think we have a cleaner, more viable and more cost-effective alternative. And we categorically reject the notion that Mr. Zern has put forward that we don't care about these things. And frankly, we think that's a really irresponsible thing for the general manager to lay out. We care about this stuff and we have some experience working on it. We work with utilities all up and down the state to identify alternatives to gas plants. We are working with PG&E, we are working with Edison, we are working with the Department of Water and Power right now to identify cost-effective solutions to avoid not only building new gas plants, but actually retire large power plants, multi-hundred megawatt power plants, and replace them with clean energy. There's a reason why an alternative that was initially, that the proposal for initially 250 megawatts is now 191 megawatts. And that's because the people in this room said, no way, we're not here for a 250 megawatt power plant. The politics shifted, and so the proposal shifted in response to that. And what that says to me is that we're not really basing our decision whether it's 191 megawatts right now or 250 based upon what the city really needs to remain reliable and keep rates cost effective. We're basing it on our gut. And so what we're asking for is an alternative study, something that takes it out of the hands of the Glendale Water and Power, because what we heard today was not a presentation from a utility that seems open to all sorts of different solutions. They're very focused on getting their power plant built without considering the full range of options. When we had the same conversation with the Department of Water and Power, they said, hold on, we're going to hit pause. Now, they have a far more complex system. They said, we're going to pause 1,700 megawatts of new repower gas, and we're going to look at alternatives. It took a year, not 3 years, to look at it, and they're about to come back with their conclusions. What they're doing is giving the customers of the Department of Water and Power certainty that they're looking at all the options and what they're moving ahead with is the most cost-effective option. We're not getting that from Glendale right now, and that's simply what we're asking for, is a solution that says, hey, we understand that we need to keep the power reliable. We understand there's a local need. We're going to look at all the options. We're going to look at demand response. We're going to look at energy efficiency. These are options that can help put money back in the pockets of customers. There are, Glendale Water Power has great pilot programs right now for energy efficiency. We could take those programs, scale them, put money back in the pockets of schools, in the pockets of senior citizens and families, rather than building a new power plant. So our ask is very simple. We just want to take a fresh look. Hit pause. Take a year, take 6 months. Look at alternatives. Bring in a third-party consultant to provide the best possible thinking with 2018 data, and then come back. And if you need to build something, I think it's a much different conversation if the public's been given the assurances that we've really given our best option to avoid a new power plant. It's a $500 million decision that you're about to make, and given where the state is heading, given the fact that there is a proposal to move to 100% renewable energy, the last thing we want is to turn on a brand new power plant that's already a stranded asset from day one. So this decision requires a lot of forward thinking, and I get that you're being put in a really hard position. You're being told if you don't approve this power plant, the lights could go off, that people might not have power when they need it to, for all sorts of reasons. And we frankly think that the evidence that GWP has not done its homework yet to make the compelling case that this power plant is really needed right now. I want to say one other quick thing, which is that there may be a decision to support this power plant today, and if you move forward with that, we understand it. And we understand that the power plant that operates today is quite dirty, it is making people sick, and it needs to retire. From the environmental community's perspective, though, building a new power plant is not the environmentally responsible way to move forward. And it's not the most cost-effective way to move forward based on all the other examples that we've seen now across the state. So if you move forward with that, with the decision to certify the ER, to make that recommendation, there may be reasons, I have not heard them today from Glendale Water and Power, but if you do, it's not because it's the most cost-effective option, and it's not the most environmentally responsive option. So we're asking you, please consider hitting pause on this proposal, bring in a third party, study alternatives, and then let's come back in 6 months or a year and make a decision. Thank you.
Next speaker is Jim Caldwell. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Gillespie.
For some strange reason, 4 folks said that they ceded their time to me. Now, I'm not sure why they made that mistake, but they did. So if I go over a little bit, I can give you the names. But in any case, my name is Jim Caldwell, and I'm as old as Grayson. And at least the piece of paper I think I gave you here is probably the same piece of paper that we've had for a while, and that when Steve was talking about, well, we've heard from so-and-so about this and that and so forth, I sort of recognize a lot of those things in that piece of paper. So let me just start by saying I do believe that the first slide that he shows that talks about we need to do something at Grayson is right on. Let's face it, it does need to be retired in an orderly way. It needs to be replaced. There needs to be significant investment in new facilities or new programs in order to replace that thing. And there's no doubt about that. There's also should be no doubt about reliability. We're not here to talk about having an unreliable system. The easiest way we're going to lose confidence in green energy or in the future is if that turns into an unreliable solution. So that, to me, is off the table, and what we need to do is to think about what is the cost-effective thing, and it starts with cost. It doesn't start with reliability. And the Grayson repowering project at $500 million for 250 megawatts is very expensive. It's very expensive compared to any other repowering facility I've seen. The closest analog to that is the Puente Power Plant in Oxnard that we talked about. That is in a load pocket. That was a plant that was designed to meet an N-1 and N-1 contingency, and it's roughly half the cost of Grayson. It was determined to be too expensive, and that the alternative of preferred resources like energy efficiency and rooftop solar and batteries was a preferred option. So it starts with that cost, and keep that number in mind, $2,000 a kilowatt. And if we're willing to spend that much money for a new gas plant, we ought to be willing to spend something similar to that, or maybe a little bit less than that, for the alternatives. And just as an example, we talked a little bit, or there's been a little bit of talk about energy efficiency, and I looked it up in the same report that they used in the EIR as to what cost we have done for the energy efficiency. And we got about 10 megawatts of energy efficiency from residential air conditioning, and we spent $14 a kilowatt for that energy efficiency, and that's compared to 2,000. So we need to think about those comparisons, and we need to do that. The second thing that I think we need to talk about is the emissions. And clearly we need to reduce the emissions. Clearly we need to reduce the toxics. Clearly we need to reduce the cancer risk. Where that mostly comes from is from burning the Shoal Canyon methane without controls. So without cleaning up the gas and without controls on the boiler, we're burning that methane at Grayson. We have to stop doing that, and we have to stop doing that soon. We cannot get rid of that gas. It is there. It comes from the garbage that we laid down 10, 15 years ago. It will be there long after we're here. So we have got to face that decision, and that decision is one that is a gating item for going in the future. There are options that we can do at Shoal Canyon, but we need to get on with that. There can be no delay in worrying about that. The second, or the next thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is this question of reserves. And as I've read through the material, the amount of reserves that were required has gone from 80 to 100 to now, it's now up to 171 megawatts of reserves in order to meet these requirements. First of all, that is not a legal requirement. The legal requirement from NERC and WEC is enforced at the balancing authority level. IID, which got fined, is a balancing authority. LADWP is a balancing authority. The PDCI is not on LADWP's N-1. It is not N-1. LADWP's N-1 is loss of one of the coal units in Intermountain. LADWP's N-1 is the loss of the second unit at Intermountain. So that.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you.
Next speaker will be Sean Starkey.
There's some people that were willing to cede their time.
Who would those people be?
President Lal, with regards to ceding time to other speakers, the GW Commission policy is that for a presentation, other speakers are not allowed to cede their time to the speaker who has a presentation. However, for public comment purposes, it's up to the discretion of the commission president.
So I will accept one speaker who's, who would that speaker be? So I will
Well,
give you
the four names I was given her that I talked to was Andrew Allison, Dorothy Molina, John Morris, and Byron Chan.
Let me see if I have cards for them. I'm assuming it would have to be someone whose card I have.
That is correct.
Okay, so the next card that I have is Dorothea Molina. So if she's willing to cede her time, I will give you an additional 5 minutes.
Thank you. I apologize for.
No, that's fine, thank you.
So the question of reserves, the legal requirement for reserves is that, and that is by the BASA, by the Balancing Area Authority Services Agreement with LADWP, is that Glendale supply its fair share of LADWP's obligation. And that is given in the BASA as 80 megawatts, 40 of which must be spinning reserve. So anything in addition to the 80 megawatts is not a legal requirement of NERC and FERC regulations. It is, and it is not a requirement of the contract with LADWP. It is a economic decision of the city of Glendale to carry that extra reserves, and those extra reserves are costly. We've already said that they're $2,000 a kilowatt. So that doesn't mean, so I think that part of this study that we talk about has to be on what is the appropriate level of reserves to be carried by Glendale. Glendale is, or it appears to be, a load pocket. That load pocket is, again, a place where these things can happen if things go wrong. There has been no requirement that I've seen that says that anything above 80 megawatts is, again, going to cause a reliability issue. There clearly are economic consequences to not being able to balance the authority under the BASA, and those economic consequences need to be weighed. And so that number of the reserves is an important number. The next thing that we talk about is the integration of the renewables, and the idea that all renewables must be firmed and shaped, or all intermittent renewables must be firmed and shaped. That is, simply speaking, not true. It is true that as we increase the percentage of variable renewable resources, that the system that is left must be flexible enough to be able to deal with the loads and to balance the system in real time. Glendale's power content has 20% wind and 0 solar. Okay, a renewable portfolio that contains roughly equal quantities of solar and wind, the solar and wind tend to firm and shape each other, because the minimum output of wind is, generally speaking, at noon. The maximum output of solar is at noon. So the combination of the two requires less than either one, in less flexibility out of the rest of the system than either one. So it is not true that we need to firm and shape all renewables. It is not true that we can actually do better by doing all the firming and shaping inside the system. Clearly, we need flexibility at Glendale, and we need to make sure that that happens. One of the easiest things to do is, first of all, to balance the renewable portfolio. The second thing we need to be able to do is to be able to trade with the other balancing authorities in the area. One thing that did bother me about the EIR was the comment about how the energy imbalance market that is springing up throughout the West and that LADWP is joining next year, that somehow prevents Glendale from trading or from, it's exactly the opposite. The energy imbalance market is an opportunity for Glendale to participate with the rest of the West, and if it has a surplus of energy at some hour, it can trade that surplus with somebody in Idaho, somebody in Arizona, somebody in the Pacific Northwest. That is the function of the EIM. You do not have to join the California Independent System Operator in order to join the EIM. LADWP has absolutely no intention of joining the California Independent System Operator, but it is joining the EIM, and Glendale should too. They should piggyback on what LADWP does. So have a balanced portfolio, join the energy imbalance market, and a lot of that issue of integration of renewables would go away. As far as the batteries, I think it's a good thing that Steve has talked about, saying that he is willing to accept the fact that battery costs have come down. The battery costs indeed have come down significantly below the numbers that he talked about. With that, I'll just at that point.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sean Starkey?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Sean Starkey. I'm here on behalf of Councilmember Jose Huizar, the Councilmember for the 14th District in the City of Los Angeles. He represents the community of Eagle Rock, which is 35,000 residents to the east and slightly to the south of Glendale. The proposed EIR assumes the development of a biogas regeneration plant at Shoal Canyon. However, on March 21st, the Glendale Planning Commission rejected the MND and the CUP for the proposed project and asked for a full environmental impact report. With two different EIRs for the projects that reference each other, community members are chasing multiple products in order to gain full picture of the impacts. If planned together, you could plan the cleanest possible projects, study all alternatives, and avoid flaring landfill gas off for 18 months or more. We request a full community process that engages all residents that will be affected and review alternatives This engagement must include the community of Eagle Rock, and Office of Councilmember Weezar is willing to help facilitate this and secure a location and outreach to any stakeholders in the community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, Andrew Allison.
I had intended to cede my time to the earlier speaker, so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Allison. Next speaker is Daniel Brotman.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Brotman. I may go a little bit over 5 minutes. If I could take some of Andrew's time, it would probably only be a minute or two.
Okay.
I'm a co-founder of the Glendale Environmental Coalition, or GEC. As you probably know, the GEC came together last summer to oppose the Grayson project. We don't have a formal membership structure, but we have people opt into our mailing list, and on that basis, we have now over 800 supporters, and between 500 and 600 of those are Glendale residents. And this isn't just a passive list. As you also probably know, we encouraged people to come and send comments on the draft EIR, and as you've heard, over 1,100 people responded expressing opposition to this project. And it goes beyond letter writing. We had a large crowd come to the EIR hearing in front of this commission. More recently, we had 200 people rally in front of City Hall when we thought the EIR was going to be discussed, and then 500, in fact more than 500, 2 weeks later when the actual discussion took place. We're expecting a similar sized crowd next Tuesday. Why should this matter to you? Why am I telling you about these crowds? It should matter to you because it says that a large segment of the community is concerned about this project, either because of climate risks, air quality impacts, or financial implications. I'm not suggesting that you oppose the project simply because it's unpopular, but the fact that so many people care this much makes it imperative, and this is my point, it makes it imperative that everything be done to explore clean energy alternatives before spending even a dime on gas infrastructure. Have we done all we can to explore clean alternatives? It's pretty clear we have not. From the time this project was first conceived, the intent was always to build a gas plant. Look at how GWP went out to select its consultants, Pace and Stantec. The RFP set an explicit requirement for expertise in gas generation. The RFP was silent on expertise with renewables or energy efficiency. Silent. Of course, GWP got what it wanted, gas experts. So even if the people working on this project were inclined to look at alternatives, and based on their financial interests, I would say they were not inclined to do so. But even if they were, they lacked the expertise. This is a critical flaw. I understand that legally, GWP does not need to evaluate all potential alternatives to the project. They only need to look at a few alternatives. These can be as realistic or unrealistic as they choose. Well, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe they can't do that. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. GWP is not a private entity. It answers to the city, which in turn is answerable to the residents. And the residents want to know that every reasonable effort has been made to use renewables and energy efficiency to solve Glendale's reliability needs post-Grayson. They do not believe this has been done, nor do I, nor does anybody who has looked at this carefully. So it behooves this commission to recommend that council not certify the EIR, but instead commission a clean energy study by a group of people with the expertise to study clean energy. This would take 6 months, 9 months, at most a year, not 3 years. That number was pulled out of somewhere, but it's not what we're talking about. What's the downside? There's no need to reject the EIR. Just set it aside and don't act on it until the facts are in. And I would also respectfully ask the Commission that this be done with the active involvement of the community through a citizens advisory panel of some kind. Details can be worked out, but the key is to ensure that the process is above board and that the residents trust the outcome, whatever it might be. Those are my prepared comments. I have one other thing I would like to say, and that is we hear a lot about the power content label. We hear Mr. Zern talk about the 47% of renewable in our portfolio. A question I have is, if we go forward with this repowering, will Mr. Zern or GWP commit that that number will not go below 47%? In other words, we're praising ourselves about having achieved this milestone, and it is an important milestone, and it's a great thing that we've done. But can they commit that we will not backpedal on that? Nothing they've said substantiates that. All they've said is we will comply with state regulations. What I believe will happen is that we will slip back because we have all this gas, and what are we going to do with it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Brotman. Kate Unger. Is Kate Unger here? Great.
Hello, Madam President, Commissioners, and staff. My name is Kate Unger. I'm a resident of Palancone Estates, which is the neighborhood on the other side of San Fernando Road from the power plant. I have a few comments related to the EIR and the project. First of all, the EIR's project description doesn't accurately describe the project setting. It says that Grayson is in an industrial area. It doesn't give information about the adjacent neighborhood. My own house, according to Google Maps, is 1,000 feet from the project site, and I'm not the closest neighbor. And we have a lot of sensitive receptors in the neighborhood. My neighbor is pregnant right now. We're very concerned about the air pollution. With respect to the comparison of the current plant and the Grayson repowering, I do understand that GWP believes that there are some advantages to changing out the equipment, but I'd like to suggest that that's not the comparison you want to look at. You want to look at the comparison between any gas and no gas, because you haven't yet identified that it's impossible to have no gas, or even less than what GWP is asking for, or for their alternative 5. I also wanted to note that I think the final EIR approach to public comments was inadequate. Certainly, many people expressed concern with the project. Over 1,000 people reached out because they cared that much. And Mr. Weber explained in the presentation that no substantive changes were made, despite the fact that people recognized there were problems with the project. No mitigation was added. Essentially, he said we weren't legally required to change in response to public concerns, so we didn't. Those concerns remain, though. You know, residents have been asking for an independent study by one or more clean energy experts that doesn't take the repowering project as the default, as the alternatives in the EIR do, and instead looks at potential renewable energy projects on a clean slate. That study would still have the objective of meeting the power demands reliably and without breaking the bank. But the point would be to have a robust set of renewable energy options that you can look at and weigh along with the Grayson project. The alternatives in the EIR don't accomplish that, and I think the EIR is like looking at a puzzle with key pieces missing. I really urge you to not certify this EIR until you have the whole picture. So I'd like to ask that you don't recommend a project with 250 megawatts of new gas power, or even one with nearly 200 megawatts with some battery added in. Don't settle for not as bad as the original. let's try to find out what's really good before we make a decision. My final comment regarding the delay concern, I think that if this current EIR goes forward, there will be a lawsuit, there will be delay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker is Angela Johnson Mazzaros.
Good evening. My name is Angela Johnson Mazzaros. I'm an attorney at Earth Justice, and I'm here representing the Sierra Club. Now, there are really two issues that are before you at this moment. One is, what's the project you're going to implement? And the other is, what's the adequacy of the environmental document that's currently before you? So the people in this room have been and will continue to be far more eloquent than I about how you ought to think about your project decision. But what I want to spend a moment talking about is the adequacy of the EIR that's before you. We reviewed both the draft environmental EIR and the final environmental EIR, and we believe that it has significant problems, and as currently written, the document isn't lawful. Now, we submit extensive comments to the DEIR, and I encourage you to take a look at them. And as was just discussed and was acknowledged, the final EIR did nothing to address anyone's concerns, including the concerns that we raised. Generally, the project is flawed in two ways. Generally the document is flawed in two ways. There are technical flaws about how the EIR is addressing issues around air pollution, how it's addressing issues about earthquake risk, how it's describing and justifying the project. I won't go into any of those. But the other way that it's flawed is it fails fundamentally as an environmental document for the exact reasons. It fails fundamentally as an informational document for the exact reasons that person after person has come up to this podium to talk about. Now, as you've discussed extensively, there are alternatives that are not included in this document. Many times when these questions are raised, either from people in the audience or from people there on the dais, Mr. Zern gave a response that said, oh, we're looking at that. We've thought about that some more. There are other things that we could probably explore. Those things need to be in your environmental document. What the document is supposed to do, the fundamental purpose of CEQA, is to outline what's your project, what are its environmental impacts, and what are the alternatives. In this document, we have confirmation, has not laid out all of the alternatives. They need to be in there, they need to be put forward, and the City Council and this body need to be able to think about those things and piece together the project that's going to best meet the needs of Glendale, both of its environmental conditions and of its financial conditions. So, what I urge you to do is to think about this. The question that people are asking you to ensure that you've thought about is, how much clean energy can Glendale incorporate? What would be the cost associated with that? And how much can we step away from a proposal of gas at Glendale, at Grayson? CEQA requires you to be transparent about that. Fundamentally, the document is supposed to give the public assurances that alternatives were considered and those alternatives should be clear, they should be direct, and it should be to policymaking bodies such as this commission and the City Council to ultimately decide how those pieces fit together. When you review this final document, what you see is a document that explains all the reason why something can't happen. And what this commission ought to do is ask the staff to come back to you with all the things that can happen. And once you've answered that question, I believe that the residents here will be far more satisfied with the proposal moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker is John Morris. Oh, I'm sorry, that was Joan Morris, I apologize. Byron Chan. Bert Culver. Okay. I believe that's it for public comment.
If I may, I just want to go through and make a few comments, and then obviously the floor is yours. I commented on a couple of things. Mr. Morehouse, I appreciate his comments. I have reached out to Mr. Morehouse to discuss issues related to the plant, and that invitation stands if he would like to talk. Mr. Gillespie, again, on the one hand, reliability, how dare you question our objective of wanting reliability, but then the counter proposal doesn't seem to match that, so I'll leave it at that. Mr. Caldwell, again, I thought we had addressed this with Mr. Stickman, but two things, and Dave, you might want to back this up. We did a cost comparison to the two projects he mentioned, or the Pointe project, the other was the Pasadena project. So our cost per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour, excuse me, is right in line with what those projects were. Keep in mind, the Pointe project you referred to as a vacant site. Both Pasadena and Glendale are demolition and construction, so believe me, that significantly increases the price. But I'm going to ask Mr. Stickman to come up once again and talk about the contingency issue, because in that particular case, Mr. Caldwell is just flat wrong. But I'll have Mr. Stickman
Sure.
talk about that.
Thank you. And one thing I just think is a good foundational perspective here is we can have our opinions, but we can't have our own individual facts. And, like I said, I'm completely agnostic as to what these folks decide. But what I will tell you is what your obligations are, what the limitations are. That's all I'm here to tell you. That doesn't presuppose any of this. And what we've seen from the other side is an attempt to create their own facts. And this is the reality. Until we're dealing with the same common facts, then you're setting the argument up for the end result, which is what their goal is, to make this plant something that's smaller. And while I understand it, if that was our option, I wouldn't be saying otherwise. I get no value out of it. I'm not a part of this process other than to tell you what your obligations are. Legally, let's talk about the Boston, the 80 megawatts, because that seems to be something that keeps coming up. We negotiated that contract with LA. I did it with my iron fist, and I told them, we have a PDCI that's at 80 megawatts. It's been derated. That is what we believe our current, existing at that moment, single largest contingency was. And I said, can we cut a deal with you? Can we buy it from you? And will you take on some liability for us? And they said they would under the circumstances, because I was suing them at the Energy Commission. And I had a lot of leverage. You guys remember that case. I had a lot of leverage. The rub with that contract is that they can cancel that contract. So this recreation of history is just not true. And it's, I can understand why they may think that's the case, but, that's how we got there. He had a D-rate, and so that made the PDCI 80 megawatts, so that's why we argued for that. The most important aspect of the BOSA, which wasn't mentioned, is it's a 1-hour call option. At the end of 1 hour, it's our problem. We have to respond. Our system has to respond. Now, even though I had all of that leverage, that was the best I could do, because, as I said, in these circumstances, LA said, when the wheels come off and we're all in this together, the PDCI goes down, et cetera, we can maybe help you out for an hour, but after that, you guys got to figure it out on your own. So I just want you to understand that. There's no bait and switch. There's no misrepresentation here. That is the reality. That's where the number comes from. So I want to make sure this is crystal clear. Again, I don't have a dog in this fight. I just want you to know what you need. The TSA is another aspect of the discussion that we didn't hear from Mr. Caldwell. Is each of our transmission service agreements say we will, for that particular line, we will provide reserves. So this idea that we're pushing this number up, trying to misrepresent, it's just not fair, it's not true, and frankly, I have no reason to do that. So I take offense at that because I want you to understand that this is a very, very difficult decision, but you have to make the decision based on the facts. And those are the facts. They can't have their own facts. They can have their own opinion, and frankly, I understand it, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. So, he asked me to explain how the PDCI was derated. You know, there was some issues, as Mark Youngin mentioned, which caused the capacity on the PDCI to be reduced, and that happens, and it will happen, and it'll continue to happen. So that's why that matters. The only other thing I would like to point out, I think the gentleman from the Sierra Club brought up some interesting points, and I think it goes to Mr. Kadikian's questions, and I think there was a missing link there, which he talked about. The gentleman from Sierra Club talked about LA and PG&E and some other folks working with the Sierra Club to figure out alternatives. That's true. But the difference is these are utilities, for example. LA has put in thousands of megawatts of gas generation. So they have the running room to make these decisions. And I think what Mr. Kadikian was asking is, do we have that running room? We don't now, but I think if we have this resource or a resource, whatever it is, that we meet all these other obligations, then that gives us running room to do these things. So that's important. You know, you had Haynes unit, which is a 1,580 megawatt gas unit that LA built. I mean, you know, it's huge. So you know, I just want everyone to be clear. As long as if you understand the facts, you know, you make the right decision that you believe is right. I think that's all that matters. So, you know, I just wanted to clear that up. And if you have any questions, please ask.
And again, I think a good segue off of that, what was mentioned in Sierra Club, the sense, the representative, Mr. Gillespie, I'm sorry, the comment that, you know, up and down the coast, people we're turning away from the gas-fired generation and moving towards something else. That's not necessarily true. As John said, LADWP has completed 4 repowers in a fairly short time. They've done, I believe, Scattergood twice, Haynes and Harbor, and they have some more. In the last, in 2012, the city of Anaheim commissioned a brand new plant. They, in fact, had gotten caught by being solely dependent on the CAISO and found themselves in such a situation that they needed to go back and build a power plant. They built that. Ms. Law, you and I were at a 1,244 megawatt repower project in Los Alamitos. That's right here in our backyard. That same company, AES, and their sister plant in Huntington Beach is doing 844. They have a pretty impressive battery project in that project as well, which is nice, and that's really what we went to see. But no mistake about it, the construction is on, and that plant is being built. So the sense that somehow this has all gone away and we're the last ones standing who are doing this is just false. You know, those AES facilities are primarily feeding Edison. You've got LADWP that's put power in. And going back to what John said, boy, if I had PG&E, Edison, and LADWP's reserves, then we could spend a lot of time talking about a whole different set of different things that we might want to do.
Yeah, and sorry, that triggered another thought. There was a discussion of us joining EIM, and with LA is already in EIM. Oh, well, they're joining EIM. 2020 is now the date, and so there's going to be a lot of resources that may not be available to us. The value of us joining EIM would be if we had excess generation. For us just to join EIM and assume that we can that would somehow fix our problems is just not accurate. So.
Just further wrap up is individual Mr. Starkey. That's really a separate project. He'll get his opportunity to speak if this is appealed to the City Council, which is what the next step would be in that particular project. And then Ms. Unger and Ms. Johnson-Nazaros, I hope I pronounced that right. If you have any questions about their comments, I would defer to Lisa and Doreen. Those are legal issues, so you'd be happy to answer those. With that, I'm ready to answer your questions.
Any questions from the commissioners?
Yes, I had a question with regards to LADWP and their energy or renewable attempts and the fact that they have all this gas generation to have the luxury to go ahead and explore these options, and that we do not. So twofold question is, the first one, how much luxury does LA have that they can go ahead and explore these options, renewable options?
Do you want an exact number of the megawatts that they generate from gas, or are you looking at how do they meet their reserve obligations?
Well, I'm trying to, what ultimately is going to happen, or your argument is, let's go ahead and build this, and then we have the luxury to go ahead and choose renewable options that we may want. We just, at this point, don't have that luxury. And I'm trying to compare ourselves where we are compared to LA, trying to figure out how much easy was it for them, or how much difficult is it going to be for us?
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I can read this because I have this here, actually. Okay, so LA has 40% coal-fired generation. That's Intermountain, at Delta and Navajo. They got 22% gas-fired, 11% nuke, because that's PV Palo Verde, 10% hydro, and that's a lot of small, it's a mixed bag. And then around 8% from wind, and another 5 to 8% from other renewables. So you're at 47, and they're at, give them the benefit of the doubt, 16. So that's the fundamental difference.
I'm not talking renewable purchases from outside. I'm talking renewable generation inside, here, in their territory or in our...
You mean in basin, renewable generation within their city borders?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Castaic is their pump storage, and that's a giant battery. It's a pump storage project.
It's actually a great project.
It's a giant battery. Essentially, when the peak solar day, when you can get some cheap renewables, you pump up water into this reservoir, and then when prices go up or demand goes up, you just open the spigot and it's a hydro unit. So that's their in basin renewable facility.
And they have about 4,000 gas in basin.
And their transmission into from outside?
I don't know what their total transmission is.
I'm reading from the LADWP website. You can go on there. Yeah, you can go on their website. I'm just quoting from their website. I mean, maybe it's wrong. I don't know, but I'm just reading from their website. So
the second follow-up question is with regards to, let's build this now, and then we'll have options to explore renewables, whether generated locally or what have you. If we built this now, what would be the financial incentive to do any of those renewables in the future?
Well, it may not be financial. Maybe it's political. That again, it's above my pay grade. As I say, I'm agnostic as to what the resource is. It just needs to be in basin. And if folks at Sierra Club came up with something that met those requirements, then that's great. But that hasn't happened. And so that's why I say, in these other circumstances where you see entities that are trying to grow their renewable portfolio, they have a fleet of gas that they can lean on. So it's a different circumstance, that's all. And all I'm asking is that the facts that we discuss are the actual facts, not made-up facts. That's all I ask.
All right.
And just to follow up on that, our incentive is because it's the right thing to do, to continue to seek out renewable energy. I think, Mr. Kadiki, that direction is clear from the council, and certainly it's part of the mission of GWP. With that, I will leave it to you now.
The question was raised about how building, let's just, for the sake of argument, talk about the 200 megawatt or the 191 megawatt combination gas, one combustion unit, 2 peaker units, the 50 megawatts of storage. How does that integrate with the chart that we're looking at on the screen here, where Glendale is clearly leading in terms of our neighbors with the implementation of not just renewable energy, but non-carbon energy. So how do those two things dovetail, if at all?
And that's a good point as Mark walks up. This is just our renewable per state.
Right.
definition, the carbon-free and renewable together is closer to 64%. When you roll Palo Verde and primarily Hoover in, which are not RPS
Right.
compliant projects, but they are carbon-free.
Through the year, there's opportunities for us to be able to buy these carbon-free products that aren't obligated over a 20 or 30-year period through a PSA, and we've taken advantage of doing that in the Pacific Northwest.
What is a PSA?
A power sales agreement.
Okay.
Sorry. So last year was a high water year. So as the snow was melting in the Pacific Northwest, we were able to buy clean energy, more clean energy than we would have normally bought during the drought years. So we can see that we look opportunistically to buy those things to keep our generators off. We do that all the time. Our trading group looks for opportunities to keep the units off, and you only use those units when you need to use the units. The perception is that we're going to run those units because they're brand new. That's not what we're looking to do. We're looking to use those units so that we can meet peak load and meet reliability. So these numbers here have to do with us going out to participants like SCAPA that group together to find renewable resources in Utah or in Nevada, or looking at Wyoming wind, and we all group together, and through that group we're able to purchase renewable portfolio. And that is what we're going to use on our transmission line, or that's the proposal, to be able to utilize that information or that megawatts on the transmission line and to keep our units and resources back until we need them.
And Mark, please stay there, because there was a couple of things that when you look at the 191 plus batteries with 2 peaking units batteries and 1 combined cycle, you're looking at that configuration designed more to address peak and contingency versus ongoing production. And that's what that advantage you have. And despite the fact of which speaker, I can't remember, said, we only came up with that because we politically pressed to do that. Wasn't true. I didn't have any political pressure from the council. It's just a matter of keeping an open mind, and as conditions change, not being so rigid as you can't say, hey, this has gotten a little bit better in this particular area. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Mark.
That's true. One of the things about price is that we could get a unit that produces 100 megawatts, 1 unit, and that would be cheaper than us purchasing 2 50 megawatt units. But if we put on a 100 megawatt unit, we can't incorporate it when it comes on, we can't incorporate it when it comes off, and we are obligated to be able to sell that excess energy if we can't use it, because electricity needs to be consumed at the time of production. So we would be forced to have to sell our excess energy. If we were to use 2 smaller units, we could take the unit off when we don't need it and therefore eliminate the need to have to sell energy at a loss, and we would reduce our carbon footprint locally.
And Mark, on the other hand, is we don't sell it at all, we just eat it, and then that's a straight loss.
That's true. We would have to lower some type of generation, and you would have to lower whatever is dispatchable to you, you'd be able to lower. And presently, what we do is we lower our IPP, which is coal. So we reduce the amount of coal being produced, and we increase the amount of water flowing from the Pacific Northwest, and that's why that bar graph looks like that. We actively do it on a daily basis, and then we give direction to our hourly traders to do it on an hourly basis.
And that's a good point from the perspective of, even though we have long-term coal contracts, one left that's still in place, we've made every attempt to try to not use it to the extent we can, which is, again, if you did the full power content label comparison, and I'm looking at it now, and I'd be happy to provide that to you. Glendale's about, at end of 2016, a 5% coal, Pasadena 40%, LA DWP 19%, and Burbank 30%. So that's another effort that we've made consciously to not only permanently get ourselves divested of coal, but also when the opportunity presents itself to push it elsewhere and not bring it into California and into our resource mix.
Quick question, if the 191 project is built, in what order are those resources deployed? Because I do think that makes a major difference in terms of concerns about air quality. We know that the 71 megawatt combined cycle is your workhorse unit. That's your base load power. It's permitted to be on almost 8,000 hours a year, 7,500 hours a year. So for all intents and purposes, that unit is running 70, 80% of the time, right? The peakers are designed for, according to the consultant, they're designed for these high heat events, high demand events. Where do the batteries fit in? Do the batteries kick on? Are they sitting there being charged with that incoming power? Do they kick on when we exceed the combined cycle resource and before we go to the peakers? Because if they do, that's a lot of carbon that is not being emitted, because those peakers are our last resort. I guess that's what I'm asking. Are
they
peakers,
the last resort?
Are they the last resort, or is it combined cycle and then peaker 1, peaker 2, and then we go to batteries?
Ideally,
because that would really
we would like to
affect the
utilize the
actual
batteries as quickly in the mix as we can to avoid having to use the generating units. But let Mark and Dave.
We're going to concentrate on shifting that resource because the solar production is heavy between 10 o'clock and 1500 hours. Well, our peak is when everybody goes home and turns their lights on and then plugs their cars in, and that's when there is no solar. The old conventional way of producing electricity is they have base load units. Well, these base load units are being turned off because they're so big and there's not enough energy to meet that nighttime peak. So what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to use the solar generation during the back of the duck, which is about anywhere between 10 o'clock and 1400, charge the batteries, and at 1800 to 2000, discharge the battery. And that will offset the most expensive hours of generation and allow us to transition, because that's our peak will start coming down.
And is it possible to, what's the word? Is it possible to replace one of those peakers with even more battery? I mean, is it possible to just keep chipping away at, my concern is the amount of gas still. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay,
so my question is it possible, given that we've moved to this alternative as a viable option, and now we're looking at a combined cycle with the battery, is it possible to keep pushing at the need for those peakers? That's my question.
I think on a piece of paper, it's probably possible, but right now, we have a 350 megawatt system and a 50 megawatt battery. That's just unheard of. We're such a small utility to be able to handle a 50 megawatt, 200 megawatt hour battery that I don't think that if we went to 100 megawatts and a 400 megawatt hour battery, that would be huge. That's more than our load. So I don't know if that makes sense to do that, but I understand your need to try to minimize local gas-fired generation. We don't use our local gas-fired generation in excess. We're trying to find opportunities. So when people are discharging or getting rid of their solar because they're overproducing, and instead of giving it to Nevada or the Power X's of the world, we would be able to consume that and charge the battery using solar from the CAISO, because they're negative pricing during the back of the duck curve.
Commissioners? Additional questions?
Well, I mean, I'm prepared to make a recommendation for the 50 megawatt battery right now. I mean, I think that that's the right way to go. And I think that that should be brought on as quickly as possible, because that can have an effect of shaping our load, depending on how it gets deployed. And if we can shave some of the peak off of our load using the battery storage, that may minimize some of the need for all of the ready reserves. I think that that's a good way to go, even if we were still going forward with a 250 megawatt power plant. At this point in time, I'm not prepared to recommend the 250 megawatt power plant. I think that that's too big. The question for our commission at this point is, what are we going to recommend to council? So I think the battery, yes. I think that I think that the way that we've gone about this whole process is a little bit antiquated in the sense that we presuppose what resource we wanted at the outset of all of the competitive bidding, both for the consultant and for the project itself. I think there's been a lot more innovation in the energy delivery space and a lot more change and radical departures from where, excuse me, can we minimize the conversations up on the front there, please? Excuse me, Mr. Webb. Thank you. So I think that there's been a radical amount more innovation in this space than I ever thought possible in as short a time as I've seen. So I think that all competitive bids, competitive solicitations for power plants at this point moving forward should be fuel agnostic and should look at them and test the market to see what the market can deliver at this point. I am torn between the community's input of wanting to see some delay in this process and wanting us to explore alternative options and the need to move quickly on this project, because time is not on our side. Time is risk. Time is cost risk, and time is reliability risk. And this is an 80-year-old power plant already living on borrowed time and needs to be replaced. There's a health impact if we wait, just for the local community. There's a GHG impact if we wait for the global environmental community. So I am open to making a recommendation along these lines if we want to have something before us to debate. But I think at this point, what I'm prepared to support is the battery moving forward. I think that we could have a debate about whether it's appropriate to delay the final certification for, say, 3 months while we go out to an RFI for the market. I don't think we should hire another consultant. Because I don't think that the consultant will give us plenty of options, but some of them may or may not be marketable, market viable. I'll put it that way. An RFI will test the market to see what the market is willing to deliver. So I throw that out there as a comment. I think I'd be more than happy to make that in the form of a motion if someone wants to entertain that.
Commissioner Howell. Before us, at least Commissioner Actions indicates to certify the EIR, decline the certification of the EIR, or present an alternative project or a project
And these would fall within number 3.
Right. So my only concern with that is when you provide you agree or submit to a project or an alternative project, you are certifying the EIR. Because
That's not my understanding of it.
You're not certifying the EIR.
we're recommending a certification of the EIR. Obviously, City Council is going to do that.
That's not my understanding of
Well,
it.
there's 2 separate ministerial acts involved there. So there's the certification of the EIR, which is a legal action in and of itself, and then there's moving forward to market with a particular project. And so what I would say is that council can simply take no action on the certification of the EIR, go to market with an RFI, which does not presuppose that that project is going to get built, but it tests the market and says, we need 200 megawatts of local generation. Market, what do you have? Not presupposing that it's going to be a gas plant, not presupposing that it's going to be local solar, but just asking the market, what do you think you can deliver?
Okay. Maybe Ms. Martirosyan could correct me on this, but when we are picking one of the alternatives that are in the EIR, in effect, we are certifying we are recommending a certification of that EIR. Am I wrong in this?
President Lal, Commission members, Commission Member Kadikian, if I understand your question correctly, by the 3 options that are before the Commission, the 3 proposed motions, it's either certifying the EIR as presented with the project as originally presented, recommending that the council not certify the EIR, or recommending one of the alternatives. The alternatives could be one of the 5 that is before the commission, or it could be any other alternative that the commission so wishes to make a recommendation for. How that alternative will be considered by the city council, that's up to the city council. So to answer your question, if I'm understanding it correctly, just because the commission is proposing a different alternative, it doesn't mean that the commission is recommending that the EIR be certified. The commission is in fact recommending an alternative for the city council to consider.
Well,
I hope that's helpful.
I understand, but of the 3 actions here, 2 are with regards to certifying or rejecting an EIR. A third one is about a project, not about the EIR. And before they move on to any project, they have to certify the EIR. Otherwise, they cannot move to any project.
Let me see if I can help a little bit with that. The idea is, the thought is, correct me if I'm wrong, ladies, the thought is that if you come up with an alternative, now if you have an alternative that you're settling on within the EIR, let's say for argument's sake, the 191 plus 50 batteries.
Project alternative.
The project alternative.
Yes.
You could certainly recommend that and certify the EIR with that project. Correct. Okay. You could also say, we would like, if that's your recommendation, to do something less than 191 megawatts, whatever that number may be, and say plus the 50 batteries or not the 50 batteries, and you could say, we'd like to recommend looking at that project. Now, in that case, that is an alternative that's covered in the EIR, or Lisa, would it fall under the 150?
Yeah, what we worry about is if impacts are greater than what was studied in the EIR.
Right.
If you want to recommend something that is less than it's in the EIR, you could still recommend certifying the EIR, and the council could potentially take action under that. We would want to look at what those impacts would be just to make sure there would be no increased impacts, but it's potentially something that would be within the envelope of impacts that were studied in the EIR, if that helps.
So if you said certify the EIR and do a 150 megawatt, we'd take that back, but we double check to make sure that that 150 megawatt option didn't alter the EIR to the point that we couldn't certify the existing EIR, but would have to make revisions and do that. Okay. So it actually gives you a lot of leeway, and that was our intent.
Okay, so since we're discussing this, I just want to express my concern about certifying the EIR and why I'm saying this. It says, I'm reading different questions that I had posed to the city attorney's office about the EIR process, and I looked at the code as well. Basically, it says that in evaluating whether to certify an EIR, it is important to note that CEQA does not require technical perfection. Got that? Instead, the general standard is adequacy, completeness, and good faith effort at full disclosure. My concern is the completeness when it comes to studying the renewable alternatives. It says, specifically, a lead agency is required to recirculate an EIR when significant new information is added to the EIR after public notice is given to the availability of the draft EIR for public review, but before certification. And as used in this term, it says information can be changed in the project or environmental settings, as well as additional data for other information. It says, rather, it must consider a reasonable range of potential feasible alternatives that will foster informed decision-making and public participation. The renewable alternative that was considered, from the get-go, that was not a reasonable alternative. Putting 250 megawatt of solar panels everywhere in Glendale was not a reasonable alternative. And my concern is, if we do anything saying this EIR is okay, then we gave all the alternatives to City Council. City Council will make that same decision as well anyways. But certifying the EIR or picking a project from this EIR is basically saying due diligence was done. Now, go ahead with whatever you want or whatever we want. That's my concern. I don't think full due diligence was done when it came to renewable. I'm not saying the project should have been 250 renewable or the other way, 250 gas. I don't think good faith effort was done in determining how much renewable we could somehow generate locally. 40 megawatts, 50 megawatts, whatever that may be. And I understand the integrated resource plan, and that was part of it. But here we are, we're planning for a 30 or 40 years in the future, and we have not reviewed whether we can get 40 megawatts or 50 megawatts by changing laws or incentivizing people to put rooftop solar and proceeding with this project. I'm happy within 2 months we managed to save 35 million by just, going into battery. My proposal would be recirculate this EIR for 6 months or 8 months. Let's review all the renewables that we can get in this. And I'm not talking, again, 250 of renewable. Could we possibly get 40 megawatts of renewable by incentivizing or whatever is necessary? Let's get somebody to look at that question. And then we have all the options. The answer may be no, we cannot. I don't believe that question was studied. For whatever reason, the EIR went full on either 250 renewable or 250 gas. There wasn't a fair study of how much could we get rooftop solar in Glendale from residents. I know they considered city property and what have you. So that's my concern. My option would be to send the EIR for a recirculation, 6 months or 8 months. With regards to urgency, so somebody put us here. For 15 years, they delay, do nothing, and somehow we have to rush into a wrong decision. The mistake is on them. We do our best, but we still have to do the right decision. And Commissioner Howell had a good idea. I think the battery is great, and we should implement that right now, as soon as possible. And let's put the battery, regardless what we put. It seems the battery is going to go in there anyways, one way or another. If not now, in the future. Let's put the battery in there and buy us 6 months, 8 months, whatever it is, to study all the alternatives so that 20 or 40 years later, when we tell our children that we recommended to City Council to certify the EIR, we know we did our complete and all possible due diligence on this. That's my position on it.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify, did anyone have any more questions for the consultants or for staff? Or are you ready to make your comments?
I don't have any further questions.
I don't have further question. I think we have covered all the corners. This way or that way, up and down and right and this way, that way. I think we have talked a lot. Even if we talk another 1 year, we'll come to the same point that we are here. I think that we have talked adequate to understand what is the situation. As far as the numbers is concerned, I mean, just throwing out a number is not scientific thing. For example, if we say 50, somebody would say, why not 40? Why not 60? Why not 20 megawatt of batteries? So my stand is, personally, I don't like to make a pause. We have to go forward. I mean, if we make a pause, believe me, after 1 year, we'll be in the same location that we are now. So I think we have to go forward. And the other thing that I want to say, when we're talking about solar, we have to be all power, generally speaking. We don't have to think utopian. I mean, if it's utopian, I'll sit here and say zero emission, 100% solar. Of course, this is something that everybody would approve. But is it possible? I'm an electrical engineer. I know this is not possible. So the other concern that we have, this is transmission line. I mean, the only solar that I think that is possible here is people, if really they like to spend their money and invest for 15 years, they can put solar. This is a good thing. But this is personal decision. It's not like a kind of city decision. So the other thing is that we are not looking into that. I mean, we are comparing a very small city here with the big countries and big projects, you know. It is not at all comparable. The other communities that generally, for example, 500 or 5,000 homes, they're going to solar, they have integrated, you know, electrical system there. We don't have that infrastructure here. The other thing is, you're talking about solar. I mean, if you want to inject solar into distribution level, first of all, more than 30% you can't inject because of reactive powers. The other thing is you don't have the infrastructure to do that. So the end result would be rooftop, whoever wants to do that. Really, people want clean power. They're in love with clean power. Let them do solar on their rooftops. And then coming back to batteries, of course, battery is very good and very expensive, but battery is good for a couple of hours. And if you want to charge it, if you charge it with gas power plants, again, this is the same story. If you want to power with solar, we don't have that much rooftops or land to feed that 50 megawatts. So we are coming back to something that, because I have thought a lot about this, and I'm myself pro kind of green, but when it is not possible to do something, this is technical restrictions. So my recommendation is just to go ahead, don't make pause, and ask City Council to go further, and if they want to certify it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Camargo?
Thank you. So my thinking is that the answer is in here somewhere, right? So on the one end, if you bracket this, there's the do nothing, and I don't support the do nothing alternative. You know, on the other hand, on the high end, we have the original, the preferred project is to do the 250 megawatt. I do like the step back, which apparently is the viable alternative number 5, which incorporates 50 megawatts of battery storage. I appreciate that the cost of battery, is coming down, is becoming a little bit more practical. So that to me would be probably the most palatable alternative that we could consider. I appreciate the comments from some of the fellow commissioners here, though. I would support that. From my perspective, it does feel like if we had this to do over again, it would be to start with a more open-minded approach to what that mix might look like in terms of what what we might do to replace Grayson. So I appreciate Commissioner Kadikian and Commissioner Hale, the comments about, perhaps there's a different way to approach this. Personally, I would feel comfortable with motion number 3, which is recommending to City Council regarding Grayson repowering or a project alternative being specific to alternative number 5, which is the alternative that incorporates the 50 megawatts of battery storage. But I would also feel comfortable entertaining sort of a caveat as part of that recommendation that would include, one of the recommendations that Commissioner Hale set forth was moving forth with a request for information to see what the market might support that perhaps could be even more environmentally beneficial or preferable as compared to even alternative 5 as it is currently stated.
I've given this a lot of thought, and my first thought is that without a doubt this plant, the current plant, needs to be shut down. Glendale is doing the equivalent of trying to drive a Studebaker around to provide power for us, and it's not viable, it's obsolete, and it's highly polluting, and the plant as it currently is needs to go. In terms of replacing the power, I think that we are united in terms of our desire to see reliable, cost-efficient, non-polluting power as much as possible. I was very concerned in October to see a presentation in this day and age of a 250 megawatt all-gas plant. It seemed like kind of a dinosaur, given where we are technologically. And I share Commissioner Camargo's feeling of being heartened to see significant movement. Just to reiterate, removing one of two base load power units, those combined cycle units, removes out of this recommended project almost 7,500 hours of emissions a year. I mean, that's at 71 megawatts. That's a lot of power that was cut out of the proposed project. I understand that's not the preferred project. We're talking about alternative 5, but that was a lot of power that was removed, and it was replaced with a 50 megawatt battery storage, which is something I think everyone in this room wants to see. Everyone can get behind it. And I guess what remains for me is we've still got these two peakers. I understand the operational need. I think a solid case has been made for the contingency issue. But I share your concerns about how we kind of started on this process, and if we had to do it over again, how would it be different? So I would like to know if we can push harder and see what comes from asking the market to come back to us with some ideas about how this plant could be cleaner and greener. Again, I see movement in the right direction. I see significant change. Mr. Zern and I stood actually inside of a battery storage unit several months ago and looked around and saw all of the wires and lights lighting up. And I mean, these projects are being installed, they are being used. I want to see our city on the forefront of adopting aggressive new technologies. I want to see our city on the forefront of innovation. I feel like the tail was kind of wagging the dog here, and it would not surprise me if at the end of this process we end up with a combination gas-fired plant with some significant battery storage. But I just think we need to have another look, and I would really like to see the city go out to, I mean, here we are in California, let's go out to the innovators, let's go out to the inventors, let's go out to the people who are making these projects work and ask them, here's our best alternative. What can you do to improve this? How can you make this an even cleaner project? I'm heartened to see those GHG emissions and those air pollutants go down between the current plant, then the proposed plant, and now finally this alternative where they go even lower. But let's put our shoulders into this just one more time. This is such a critical moment for our city. Let's not waste it. And let's ask the question once more. And I do want to state at this point, I don't want to see a big delay in this plant going offline. Grayson needs to go. And I don't want to see, you know, Steve's worst case scenario of a 3-year delay. I agree that that would really be a terrible result. But if there is a way to efficiently and with consciousness of time push this process forward with the input of the market, I welcome it. Those are my comments.
President Lal, I think we're talking similar, just we can't figure out the mechanism of it. The mechanism that you're proposing is going and asking industry to see if some better alternative there is.
An RFI.
RFI. How would that fit within where we are at this point? At this point, we're required to pick something or recommend something about the EIR process. I agree it's not complete, so I'm not sure what's the process about getting
Madam
that
City Attorney,
information.
can I ask a clarifying question? May the council neither certify nor reject the certification for the EIR? May they simply take no action on it for a period of time?
President Lull, Commission members, Commission Member Hale, yes, the council is at liberty to take no action or any action other than certifying or not certifying.
So then we can simply call that a pause, wait for the RFI process to complete, and then come back to the EIR once we have tested the market.
That would be the objective I'm trying to reach at, is because I called it a different name, recirculate the EIR, but it's the same
That is a
point.
different
That's a
thing.
wholly separate
It is?
legal
A
action.
recirculation of the EIR is a completely different process.
All right.
We're
Now
talking
if-
about something different.
So basically, what I'm talking about, 6-month pause and get renewable options included in this EIR. Is that what we're talking about?
That's a different matter. So we are talking about going forward with an RFI where the market may propose several different project alternatives that are different than what has ever been studied in the EIR. At that point in time, the council may wish to propose new alternatives in that EIR process before issuing the final certification for the final EIR, but essentially reopen the EIR and recirculate. That would require a new comment process. That would require some new legal process to come along with that. However, it might arrive at a project which everyone is more comfortable with. But without testing the market to know what that alternative might look like, I'm not prepared to offer alternative 9B or something like that. I don't know what that might look like. But the RFI would inform us and give us a greater sense of certainty about what that process might look like, or what that alternative might look like.
And if I can just add to that comment and perhaps ask a clarifying question. So what I would add is, there's a chance that as we go out to market, what we get back could look very similar to one of the current alternatives.
That's correct.
And what we get back could look very different. So to my very cursory understanding of the CEQA process, it's only that second category where if what we get back from the market results in a significant change in the project description, that only then would we, using the formal term of recirculate the CEQA document,
Right.
restart the CEQA process. So if we were to have that kind of an answer come back, it would be something that we can consider, but it's only if it's a significant change to the project description. But
I
I'd
think
appreciate your
we would have
your
to
comments.
see what those changes were in order to decide whether or not anything would have to be done to the environmental document. It's possible that the environmental document would still provide adequate coverage. We would just have to see what those changes are. And then we would have to evaluate whether or not recirculation would be needed or not, or any other process that might happen.
Right. So in the end, with respect to timing, I'm not big on certainly a significant pause. I share the sentiments of some of the fellow commissioners here that this is an important project to move on now. But yeah, I mean, I would support that RFI process and seeing what that tells us and how different that might be from the current.
Just a question, are you
from the
putting a
current
time limit
project.
on that?
I would say that the RFI need not take more than 90 days because what we're essentially asking for people to do is write up draft proposals, not complete
Right.
project, fully designed, fully realized power plants.
One outstanding issue we have is the final notice to proceed for the Power Island equipment expires at the end of May. That will be gone. That process will be finished, and we will have lost the initial investment we made in that. That was our contractual obligation to them. It's been well over 18 months since we did the limited notice to proceed. I'm sorry, I'm looking to the consultants. Maybe Carl Hasse, our project manager.
I didn't quite get that, Mr. Zern, so if he could explain it again, what you were saying. What project are we
The city
losing?
council issued a limited notice to proceed to Siemens for the power generating equipment. With that came a $3.3 million fee that we paid, with a date of June 1st. It's actually, the last day would be May 31st, that we had to make a decision on the final notice to proceed. Otherwise, that project the only way to hold the price is to pay a liquidated damages charge, which we weren't interested really in paying. That dollar figure, Carl, is the LD is
About $350,000 a month.
a month, $350 a month to hold the price.
That starts June 1st.
so, this year.
Well, I guess the question would be whether that notice to proceed could be extended for another 60 days.
They've indicated to us that that's not something they're interested in. We can certainly go back and talk to them again. Their issue is of holding the price. I think they'd be willing to say, we'll keep selling it to you, but we'll sell it to you for a new price. And that's what then it gets into a legal issue of whether we can do that or not without rebidding it. So I would defer to Doreen. That's the only outstanding factor we have. I think most, as Lisa said, I think most of the EIR would stand up depending on how radical the departure was.
I don't think it hurts to ask. And
Well, we've already asked Mr. Hale. We'll ask
okay.
again. Believe me, it's not that we hadn't thought of this. I think a lot of people think we just sit up here and twiddle our thumbs and wait to say something out here.
Sure.
We've been talking to these people for a long time. But you got to understand, they're in a business position as well. And so we will definitely go back and talk to them again. Where my concern with that is I think they'd be willing to give us an extension if there was a guarantee that we were going to buy something from them. And I haven't been able to tell them that. I told them I can't guarantee a purchase. And so if they said if that's the case, then we wouldn't be as interested. If they said if you want to wait 6 months to decide whether it's 4 units or 3 units, and we get a purchase, we'd be willing to talk to you about that. But if there's no guarantee, and I can't make a guarantee for the city council, but we certainly can go back and talk to them again. I'm not trying to dissuade you from your recommendation,
Well,
please, but I like the idea of doing the 90 days too, I will tell you, because time is of the essence. And what I said, I think you all understood me, although it got twisted by Speaker Brotman, was that a year of studying and then trying to get back to where we are today would be as long as 3 years, because all of these agreements would have expired. We'd have to start over in a lot of different places, including the potential engineering of the units themselves as the technology changes. That's what the 3 years conservative number was. But a 90-day RFI, I mean, if that's the direction you're going, I can tell you I at least appreciate the fact that you're putting a time limit on it, and I appreciate the fact that you're recognizing that we are under the gun.
Yeah.
From, if no other reason, the reliability and the emissions of the current plant.
Yes, there's a sense of urgency there, but, yeah. Are we ready to make a recommendation?
So just for clarity, we are saying pause this IRP until we get...
I would say take no action on certification of the EIR.
I don't see it as
It's not a, yeah.
No,
It's,
you're offering an alternative, which is you do an additional 90 days of, these are my words, don't let me put words in your mouth, of a refresher, of a refreshing of the look that we've taken, to see if there are other options. Or as somebody said, maybe it's nothing more than a validation of the options that are already available, or it could be completely different.
So what I would characterize it as, that our commission would recommend that council take no action on the EIR at this time, to issue an RFP, or I'm sorry, an RFI to be on the street for 90 days to ask for the market to deliver alternatives that were not considered as part of the EIR process. And I would add that we would ask council to move forward with the battery storage.
Yes.
And if it's possible to do that without a completely separate secret review, I don't know if that's possible or not.
I don't know, quite frankly. I mean, the ability to secure the supply is certainly something that would be appealing, because one way or the other,
yeah.
I mean, one way or the other, I'm going to recommend that we move in that direction. The only problem is I would not install 50 megawatts of battery with the current power plant. We'd probably have to look at a little bit different configuration. Maybe it goes to a substation application. Maybe it goes to just Unit 9 with I'm just saying.
Sure.
I think we could begin the process, the procurement process, if you will.
And that's what I would recommend, is we move forward with the RFP on the battery storage to actually see what kinds of projects the market can deliver with specific designs in mind. And then we come back here in 90 days to consider alternatives and reopen the conversation on the EIR, discuss whether those alternatives need to be.
Just to play devil's advocate on one thing, though, is waiting until we get more of a clear decision on where we want to go in the future before we order the batteries, because there's some schools of thought that the price may continue to go down. Just something to throw out there.
That's fair.
Yeah,
That's
I hear
fair.
you on that.
Okay.
And RFI process, since I'm not familiar, you just the city clerk puts out a notice and whoever wants.
It would be the city council.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
the city
maybe if you
council
can explain to me what's an
yeah.
RFI.
What we'll do is put together a request that essentially goes into a little more detail, but mirrors what Commission Member Hale said, which was, take a look at where the market is today. This is what we've recommended, including the alternatives. Is there other alternatives for us to reach the same objectives? And I assume, I assume the reliability issue, the contingency issue, the meeting of the legal requirements and contractual requirements that Mr. Stickman spoke of would all be part of that mix.
But agnostic as to fuel supply, agnostic as to resource.
Correct.
And I would also add that the RFI itself comes from GWP itself, right? So
It'll be GWP through approval by
clerks.
the city council. Ultimately, they're the body that approves that.
So
And we can bring that back. We can bring that back if that's in fact the way the council goes. Keep in mind the recommendation to the council, and then bring that back vetting here, and then back to the council.
So after getting that RFI, supposing that within 90 days we are going to get it. If you don't get it, what will happen? If you get it, what would be the process?
The requirement is 90 days, so they'll have to get back to us in 90 days. And then we would evaluate the proposals, bring them for a presentation, and I'll bring them to the commission, and then they would go back to the council.
And, GWP has its position already.
Mr. Kadikian, we don't necessarily have our position. That keeps being brought up. If it's your idea, this independent objective, we're paying for it. We're going to pay for it. It needs to be paid for and approved and controlled by the city to the extent. People talk about the independent study that the city of LA is doing. They're paying for it. They're overseeing it. So the fact of the matter is, we can issue the document. Council can approve it. Council can be the body that says yay or nay through. We can bring it back to here. But at the end of the day, we have to pay for it.
No, okay, trying to understand who's going to be.
Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm trying to understand who's going to be preparing this RFI.
We will send it out to a whole list of companies that have the ability to undertake this, consulting firms.
And those people are going to submit their responses?
They're going to submit their responses.
And then GWP reviews all those?
We'll select a firm, and then that firm will be given 90 days to come back with their objective. And actually, council will select the firm. And then it will be 90 days to come back with their look at what we've done to date and any changes or suggestions, recommendations they may have, whether those are to validate what's already been done or to offer a completely different set of alternatives.
But is part of this process going to be somebody who is familiar with renewable energy? And the only reason I bring this up, because this is a brand new energy system, it seems like. Battery prices are dropping. People are installing batteries in the last 1 year. So I want somebody who is in front of the envelope of these renewable, having some input in this. That's my point.
Well,
otherwise, if we just send it back to Siemens,
we're not gonna...
my concern is that. And I don't, I'm not insinuating or implying anything. I'm just saying, how could we ensure the most modern, environmental friendly, and otherwise companies get a shot at this?
That's how we'll set the scope of work. And as Mr. Hale said, it's fuel agnostic.
All right.
So, and it goes out to a long list. Some of this may seem new to us in Glendale. There's a lot of firms that have been doing this for a lot of years. We consulted a lot of those through our SCAPA connections, so it isn't like we didn't do that. But there's a lot of firms out there. We'll simply set it as neutral a situation as we can. There is no, you're not supposed that it has to be a power plant or a gas-fired power plant.
Okay.
Look at in Glendale, look at outside of Glendale, look at transmission.
They might come back with something that looks like one of the alternatives that was discounted.
It's very possible.
They might come back and say, you need to build a transmission line, coming in from the Antelope Valley. It could be any number of different scenarios.
Yeah, that's very possible. They'll look at, you know.
I think we beat the transmission horse dead. I don't know what's the point of
It's
bringing
not my
that issue
favorite,
in there.
But I think we have, I agree with you, but just I think along this, in the spirit of what Mr. Hale has proposed is, at least take one more look. Maybe something, we know pretty much nothing's happened, but you want somebody else to verify that? We can have them say, look, we're in that business. This is not available.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Hale. That is a good proposal, you know. So if it be possible within 90 days. The other thing that I want to say, this renewable is not secret. It is just like all these companies, they do renewable as well. So, I mean, believe me, we'll come up with this. We will, after 90 days, you will see each other. We will be in the same position right now.
Wow.
Because it is some of the technical things, you know, it's not possible to push it, you know, because economy is there. I mean, this proposal that comes will come with a dollar value. So I don't know 50 megawatt, for example, battery, where that number comes from. But economically, for sure, I'm 100% sure it can't compete with other solutions. And by the way, I mean, our situation in Glendale is not bad. We are talking as if we are in disaster. 47% we have renewable. We are better than any other city. So, and we are retiring the bad power plant, and we want to have some new power plant there, which is efficient, and emission is within a kind of tangible, you know, dollar-wise, something reasonable. I mean, people that they want, for example, zero emission, zero this, green 100%, do they want to their bill be doubled? Have they thought that they have to pay it for? So this is where economy comes into. So I 100% agree with your suggestion. Let them compete within 90 days.
Yeah, I would just, if I can just add, so with Commissioner Avanesian's comments, we very well may spend the next 90 days and be back in the same place. But also, as some of my other fellow commissioners have stated, you know, to my mind, it's probably worth the time. This is a problem that's been here for many years, probably should have been dealt with, as has been discussed earlier in this meeting by a number of people, something that should have been addressed, you know, 10, 15 years ago. But as Commissioner Kadikian talked about, you know, one of the challenges here is, you know, so do we need to rush it? And as I think most people here have discussed, is can we take a short pause and see if there is a way to improve it? Perhaps we'll come back to the same place. If we do, at least I personally would feel better about advocating for alternative 5, as it's stated now. I'd feel better about supporting alternative 5 than I do right now.
Sounds as if we have a recommendation to make.
President Law. President. I'll try. President Law, Commission members, I was taking notes. Let's see if I was able to capture the motion. Moved by Glendale Water and Power Commissioner, seconded by Commissioner, that having considered the April 2nd, 2018 presentation regarding the proposed Grayson Repowering Project and final environmental impact report, and the comments of interested members of the public regarding the same, the GWP Commission recommends that the City Council take no action on the certification of the EIR for the proposed Grayson Repowering Project, that the City Council direct Glendale Water and Power staff to issue a request for information relating to market input for improving the Grayson Repowering Project to be completed no later than 90 days, that the GWP Commission recommends that the City Council direct GWP staff to move forward with the issuance of a request for a proposal relating to battery storage. I didn't know if I should say to be completed no later than 90 days for that one as well? No?
Yeah, one thing I want to be added there, that this process should not come to the limit that we are going to pay penalty. It should be before that.
Liquidated damages.
I'll report that out to council.
Okay.
So the one comment is, I think you used the term, review the RFI to look for improvements.
Relating to market input for improving the Grayson repowering project.
Well, I think for
Additional alternatives.
additional.
So issue an RFI relating to market input for additional alternatives relating to the Grayson repowering project.
And the impetus in asking for those additional alternatives, at least in my case, and I believe in the case of my colleagues, is that we want to know if the project's carbon footprint could continue to be lowered.
And
So if other commissioners are comfortable saying that in the statement, in the motion,
if we can also add the energy agnostic portion, because when you talk about Grayson repower just by itself, they're just thinking repower. And
you mean gas?
gas.
Right.
So it's important we indicate in there energy agnostic.
Energy agnostic input.
Well, yes, so that we have some alternative energy people submit requests.
They will, but to put it in the motion is fine. That's good.
Although I think President Law's comment kind of captures that if we do have language in the RFI that speaks to improving the environmental footprint or
Reducing the carbon, basically I'm saying reducing the carbon footprint.
because I think that gets to your
Which I think
point if we
gets
do
to
that.
what you're trying to achieve, yeah.
One other comment that I would make is when the portion of the motion that deals with the city council not taking action, I would suggest that it's just at this time. It's not that we don't want the commission to never take action. It's just at this time because the commission is on set for what, the 10th?
Yes.
So it's at this time, and then you move forward with the next steps.
Bear with me for 1 minute. I want to make sure I capture everything. So it would be that the City Council direct Glendale Water and Power staff to issue an RFI relating to market input for additional alternatives relating to the Grayson repowering project. And one of the commission members wanted the agnostic.
I was suggesting saying to reduce the carbon footprint of the project as opposed to saying energy agnostic, because if you say energy agnostic, someone could come back and say,
coal.
Here's a 400 megawatt coal plant, all your problems are solved.
That's fine.
Correct.
To reduce the carbon footprint of the project, to be completed no later than 90 days. And we just wanted to make sure that the commission was still desirous of the RFP for the battery, or
I'm neither here.
I think given the circumstances that we're not proceeding with an actual project yet, we can hold off on the RFP for the battery storage until the RFI process is completed.
so the motion will just end with the RFI to be completed no later than 90 days.
Yeah.
If I have captured it,
You have,
Yeah.
the commission can go ahead and move the motion in and vote on it.
okay?
Commissioner Hale's motion.
It's your
So
motion.
moved.
I second.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion
Aye.
passes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, next item, or we adjourned?
Next item.
Next item?
Yeah. I'll read it and then,
Okay.
yes. 3, oral communications.
Oh, okay.
Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Commission may question a response to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The general manager may refer the matter to the appropriate staff for investigation and report. I don't have any cards.
No cards? Okay.
4, adjournment.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.